I mean, they were guerrillas and they didn't play by the rules. So after a while, we didn't play by the rules either. So we changed our tactics slightly in terms of what we'd originally been taught. The person was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was just one of those unfortunate, the Americans call it collateral damage, you know, and the collateral damage in Vietnam was enormous, quite enormous actually. And as you're going along, you're thinking, Jesus, I wonder if I'm going to meet up with you tonight, somewhere in an ambush. You just didn't know who the friendlies were and you didn't know who the enemy was. So my view to my soldiers, and I was quite clear on this, as far as I'm concerned, in the bush they're all enemy.
Good morning, Mick. Thanks for giving us your time today. I'd like to start off, before we begin the interview proper, if you could give me just a brief summary of your service details.
Joined in 1962, went to Kapooka, 1st Recruit Training Battalion. From there I was posted to Corps Training at Ingleburn, the Infantry Centre. After Corps Training I was posted as a rifleman to 1st Battalion Royal Australian Regiment at Holsworthy. And from there I was selected to attend the Officer Cadet School at Portsea, which I attended from January to December 1965. Graduated and was posted to my battalion, the 5th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment. Graduated in December and was in Vietnam in April of 1966. Served with that unit right throughout Vietnam until July. Came home on leave and then was posted to the Special Air Service Regiment in Swanbourne. And from the Special Air Service Regiment in Swanbourne was posted to 2 Commando Company at Fort Gillibrand in Victoria as the Adjutant Oblique Quartermaster. From there posted to Headquarters Southern Command as a Staff Captain responsible for ministerials and ministerial inquiries. From there posted back to my original battalion, 5 Battalion, as an officer and as Adjutant. Upon resignation of my commission, I was then posted to 1 Commando Company in Sydney, and then I basically disappeared out of the army.
And so what year was it that you left the army?
1973.
And how did you get over to Vietnam? What was the journey?
Oh, it was just a Qantas flight, charter flight, and I remember landing at Ton Sanut Airport and just opening the door and getting hit by the heat. I just remember just go whack, just the heat hit us, the humidity and the heat, and I thought, my God, you know, I've got to put up with this for the next 12 or 14 months, you know. And anyway, yeah, that was the, and then the smells.
So where were you based when you first landed? Where?
Yeah, we went to 1 Battalion, which was at Benoit, and I was sent to basically the advanced party to learn, you know. I was sent down to what they called ANC separate, which was A Company and C Company separate, which was part of the defensive perimeter around the airport at Benoit, where 1 Battalion was stationed.
And how did you get acclimatised?
Well, you just live and just move and you know, I mean, initially you move very slowly because, I mean, if you move too quickly, you just sweat like a pig so quickly. So you just move a bit slowly at the start. I used to go little jogs and little runs to get my metabolism going, and so I'd acclimatise a lot quicker. You know, you're just wearing your shorts and boots and your rifle over your shoulder, and a hat, of course. But that was about it. I mean, there was no real acclimatisation. The acclimatisation came with time in country.
And you were sent in the advance party. So what preparations were you making for 5 Battalion?
Really, just to, and I went out on a couple of patrols just to get a feel, so that by the time the main body came up, that at least some of us knew what to expect, and we'd spent some time in country. And I don't know why I was selected, but anyway, I was one of the guys that was selected, and yeah. It was very beneficial because then I I could brief my guys a bit better too in terms of look, make sure because also whilst you're sleeping with the other guys, like in a little officer's tent, you're also listening to the stories, over a beer. They sort of tell you things, and you're picking little nuances up, etc., which you just store so that you're learning from the soldiers that have done it for 12 months, basically.
I'm expecting a very steep learning curve.
Oh yeah,
there.
my word.
What did you learn in those first few patrols?
The density of the jungle, the difficulty for navigation, the importance of the communication, especially silent communication between signals, hand signals, and all that sort of stuff, and again the equipment that you carry. I mean, the equipment that we had was totally unsuitable. So we quickly went and bought ourselves some American gear to carry. We learnt that very early. Our boots were unsuitable, so we bought some American boots and little things like that. You sort of pick up as you patrol, because otherwise you just don't know. I mean, you get out there with all your issue stuff on, you suddenly realise this is not comfortable, and my feet are falling to bits because no water gets out. Our boots had no holes or anything for water to get out, and you're constantly in water. Whereas the American boots with the canvas sides, they've got little holes in them, so when you get out of the water, at least the water runs out and you've got a chance of drying out, so you don't get trench foot or athlete's foot or, bad blisters. So little things like that you sort of pick up very, very quickly.
Did you have any contacts on those patrols?
No. They're called TAOR patrols, Tactical Area of Responsibility, just an immediate area. They weren't operations out from the major base. I mean, they were conscious of not getting us involved initially because, it was really a sort of a weaning exercise type thing. So they were just TAOR patrols. And
what warnings were you given? I mean, later we will discuss more of this from your own experience, but in that initial stage, what were you told about the VC?
We had done extensive studies on the enemy and the weapons that they carry and their tactics, and we were pretty well versed on, if you like, the generic characteristics of the Viet Cong. We didn't learn much about the NVA, which are the northern mainstream forces. We didn't learn much about them because we felt that we would only really have to deal with the local Viet Cong, the black pajama crowd. And we were totally wrong in that regard because we came across quite a few NVAs in Phuoc Tuy province later on.
So can you tell me how the Reconnaissance platoon came about then?
Yeah, it was a social misdemeanour. Not really a social misdemeanour, but what's the word I'm looking for? An indiscretion. I was in A company, and I won't mention the company commander's name, it's not necessary, but anybody looking at this tape will know who I'm talking about. And we were out on patrol, and there was a contact, a fairly major contact. I mean, firstly, the company was lost. I wasn't. I knew exactly where I was. I mean, navigation was always one of my strengths. I knew exactly where I was, but the company didn't know where they were. And the company commander kept saying, Sunray was my call sign, and I can't remember now, but something 19er or 29er, Sunray 29er. Come in, and anyway, the bottom line is he was lost, and I got into a bit of an argument on the phone, on the radio. Meanwhile, there was a major contact where company headquarters was attacked, and they were only with one platoon, A company, and John Hartley was a platoon commander of that, and John Hartley ended up being a major general in the Australian Army. He's only just retired. And we had to try and get in, and of course the enemy between us and the company, which was scary. But anyway, finally, either we frightened them away or the other guys frightened them away, and there I came into this company position. There was John Hartley sitting on the ground with a bayonet trying to get a bit of shrapnel out of his ankle. And I said, John, well, that's going to stop. I'm going to get a dust off and get you out. He was wounded. So, we called in a helicopter. Meanwhile, I thought, where the hell is the company commander? Couldn't find the company commander anywhere, or the CSM. The CSM is a company sergeant major who's supposed to be responsible for discipline of the other ranks. So everybody's running around with bandages, and because 3 guys were wounded, and I got up on this big log, I'll never forget, and I looked down on the log like that, and there was a company commander with a CSM, and I just looked down and I said, you can get up now, sir, it's all over. Well, I was fronted to the CO for insubordination, and I got a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, we then kept on doing our things, but the relationship between myself and the company commander was never the same after that. Anyway, he basically told the CO that I was playing cards with my soldiers for money, which I was. I'm a gambler, But we weren't playing for, cattle ranches. We were playing sort of pretty small beer. But anyway, it was contrary to the conduct of an officer. So he fronted me the CO again. Finally, the CO realised that there was a conflict of personalities here. And he had a yarn to me. John Ward, this is the guy that tried to stop me from going to Portsea. John had a yarn to me about my problems with this particular company commander, and I told him. I said, the guy can't navigate, he's gutless, and he's unfit. By unfit, I don't mean unfit as a character, but unfit in terms of keeping the company moving. And I said, he's going to get someone killed. I just can't serve with him. So anyway, John said, well, we'll transfer you out of 2 platoon up to what's called anti-tank platoon, which was, for me, a bit of a letdown because I didn't know what their master plan was. They didn't tell me what the master plan was. And I thought, oh, God, anti-tank platoon, because anti-tank platoon is almost like a surplus platoon, which is part of the support company. And in those days, the Viet Cong didn't have tanks, because the anti-tank platoon has special cannons which knock tanks out. But I had to get away from Cassidy. I was devastated leaving my soldiers, I really was. And some of those guys are still mates of mine today from the 2 platoon. And anyway, I went to anti-tank platoon, and I didn't realise that they had some plans for me and for reconnaissance platoon. But before that, I got a hold of anti-tank platoon, and there were some pretty ordinary soldiers in that platoon. NCOs which of the old school, not the modern school. And anyway, I did as best as I could. Soldiers were great. Soldiers were great. But I did as best I could, and there was probably 2 good NCOs in that platoon. The rest were what I would call marginal or ordinary. Anyway, we did a couple of patrols, and then we did a major exercise, which was the one up in the Nui Dat mountains, where we had to climb the mountain with this anti-tank platoon in front of battalion headquarters. And we got up to the top pretty quick, but we were absolutely exhausted. And all of a sudden there's gunfire behind us, and I felt a bit guilty because we're supposed to have cleared this for the battalion to make their way up to the top of this mountain. And it was really a gradient of 1 in 2. It's a hell of a climb. So the company commander, Max Carroll, support company, terrific bloke, he got up and said, well, you better get yourselves down and clear this so that we can move up, because, you can't have battalion headquarters attacked. That's our nerve centre, it's our command centre. So we dropped our kit and we just went down with our ammunition and guns and whatever. And anyway, I left one section up on the high ground with the machine guns looking down into the re-entrant. It was a real re-entrant with big boulders and rocks and almost impregnable, really. And then I had another section which was up on the high ground up here, so one looking down that way, one looking across this way. And myself with the lead section, we went down into this re-entrant to try and find the enemy, try and clear the enemy. When all of a sudden a shot rang out, and the good section commander, Corporal Wommel, got it through the throat, and he was on a flat rock, which initially we didn't know where he was.
Can I just leave you here because the tape's winding up and I don't want to
Okay.
miss what
That's
comes
right.
next. So Wommel's on the rock. Mark, I just want to pick you up where Wommel had been shot through the throat and was laying on a rock.
Mm-hmm. Well, firstly, all he said to me was, "Skip, I've been hit," and I didn't know where he was. We had no idea. And as we were moving towards him, or trying to find out who he was, that's when the enemy opened with everything, and we just couldn't get to him. Actually, we couldn't get to him, and so we're moving around, fire and movement, trying to get behind cover, behind rocks, behind trees. I'm calling down fire from one of the sections at the top. It was Corporal McLean's section, and they're spraying the whole region. We then had the section up on the high ground actually behind me, and we just had no idea. We had no idea where the enemy was, and that was a terrifying part. And whilst I'm down there, I'm terrified that I'm going to lose somebody else and not know where they are because of the boulders and the rocks and being stuck somewhere, and an impossible place to try and extract anybody that was wounded. So whilst you're conducting this battle and you're trying to, and it was a battle, and even today we don't know whether it was 3 or 30 that were there, because every time I gave an order there'd be some shots fired my way, because obviously they'd realised that I was a commander. And then once I'd shouted, I'd have to move very quickly, fire and movement, so that when they did shoot I'd already gone. And it was just, it was utterly frustrating, absolutely frustrating. So I called my platoon sergeant forward, Skinny Calvert, and I said, "Look, we just got to try and get Norm. We've got to try and find him and try and get him out." And because he was at this stage fairly mortally wounded, and he couldn't tell us anymore. He was still initially after the contact, he was still up on one elbow apparently, and still giving orders to his section in terms of keep firing, and there they are over there, etc., etc., etc. But then, he lost an enormous amount of blood and in a state of semi-collapse, I guess. And I had a stretcher bearer called Peter Fraser, who was one of our bandsmen, played a cornet from memory, and a terrific young bloke. And we'd found the rock where Norm was at, but the enemy were using him as bait. So every time we tried to go towards him, they'd fire rounds all around him. And I thought, what the hell do I do? If one of us goes up there, we're going to be hit as well. So rather than get one out, we're going to get 2 or 3 to try and get out. So I thought at the time, not realising how seriously Norm was wounded, I thought we had to neutralise the enemy first before we could get to him and move him out. But certainly refused to leave him, certainly refused to leave him, because we're all caught in this ambush. We're all ambushed. And all of a sudden, I noticed that Peter Fraser was actually crawling up onto the rock, and he started to dress his wound, and they're still shooting, but deliberately not hitting Peter Fraser, still using both of them now as bait, And Peter actually had dressed the wound as best as he could, and Skinny Calvert, the platoon sergeant, then organised for a couple of guys to sort of try and slowly slip him off this rock so that we could get him onto a hoochie, which is like a bit of canvas. It was almost like an improvised stretcher. So we could get him up to some safe ground, because our doctor had come forward, Tony White, to see what he could do to help in terms of the extent of the wound. And meanwhile, we're still trying to find these guys and shoot at them, and just terribly frustrating. Anyway, it took us a fair while to extract Norm off the rock, And once the doctor had looked at him, he'd realised that all the blood vessels had been ruptured and Norm didn't have a lot of chance of survival. We then had to get a helicopter in to get him out, which was tricky as well because, again, the enemy was still there, and this helicopter had to land on an angle like that, and it was a pilot called, I think from memory, Askew, Lieutenant Askew from Army Air Corps, or Army Flying, and it was in a little Sue, one of those little bubble Sues. Anyway, unfortunately, Norm passed away on the landing zone, but they flew the body out. Meanwhile, we're still trapped. We're still caught, and of course, battalion headquarters further down was still caught as well. So we had to keep fighting, and try and anyway. We tried everything. I mean, we just couldn't find these fellows, and we'd fire some rounds, and then you'd yell something out like, "Have you seen any?" And next minute there's bullets coming your way, So it was really quite scary and daunting. And I remember quite clearly at the time because Max Carroll, who was my company commander, he said, "Mick, what was going through your mind?" And I was up behind this tree, big tree like this, the biggest I could find, trying to get on the radio. And the thing that was going through my mind at that time, through that whole, if you like, contact, was something I'd learned at Portsea, which is an appreciation of the situation. What if, how. So this thing I'd learned at Portsea, which was a tactical appreciation of the situation, was going through my head like a textbook. In other words, what would I do now if this was a tactical exercise with our troops? I mean, that's how you learn tactics. And nothing was coming to my mind. I mean, I was just completely bamboozled because I didn't know where the enemy was. I mean, that's the sad thing. I didn't know how many were there either. So at that time, my first priority was to extract my troops out of the killing ground because they were all down there in the killing ground. Probably 7 or 8 of us were in that killing ground. So with fire and movement, we very slowly, had to withdraw. And this is going on for hours. We had to withdraw. So I got all my guys out onto the high ground, and the other guys were up here in the high ground. When Major Peter Cole from A Company said, look, he could see where the sort of we were shooting, etc. He said we might be able to put some machine gun fire onto the position, like shooting from another angle, because he was right down the low ground. And at that stage, I was prepared to try anything. I thought, well, let's have a go. I knew it would be dangerous, but because of the beaten zone of a machine gun. Machine gun doesn't fire at great distance. It doesn't fire in a straight line. It's a beaten zone. It's a huge like this. So what I did is we marked our position with smoke, and Peter gave the order for his company to open up with machine guns. But those bullets were going above our heads because of the beaten zone, so that was pretty scary. So I just said, stop, and they stopped straight away. But they also hit the target as well, but I wasn't prepared to accept the risk, so I thought, no, I've got to do something else. We couldn't use artillery, we couldn't use mortars. So the only other thing I could use were gunships. So we had some American gunships on standby. So we called in 2 gunships, and again we marked our position with smoke. And the gunships basically shot these rockets, white phos and explosive rounds into what they could see were tunnels or caves, And that was pretty scary because we were still pretty close to it, very close to it actually. But thankfully the Americans had a good day, and they hit all what we thought were the right targets, and they just did run after run after run. And then after that there seemed to be almost quiet, nothing. It was eerie, there was nothing. And the only way then to draw fire again is to move. So again, I couldn't say to my commanding officer or my company commander, look, come up. because I couldn't guarantee that it was clear. I thought it was clear. So I, with a section, then went down into the re-entrant again that we'd just taken us 2.5, 3 hours to get out of, to go back in to see if the enemy were clear. And thankfully, they all took off. They must have, these rockets from the choppers probably frightened the daylights out of them. And also I think they realised that we were not just a platoon on our own. They realised that there was other forces supporting the action. So I think they felt that they were outnumbered. But at the time we didn't realise why they fought so tenaciously. Normally with the Viet Cong in particular, they shoot and run, shoot and scoot. And these guys stayed and defended quite vigorously, which at the time I didn't realise why, but I can tell you later why. We went back down to the re-entrant and we found blood-soaked bandages and blood in various caves and things like that. And but it was getting dark. It was really getting quite dark, and we had to get up to the top of the mountain. So the CO said, right, fantastic, like push on. So we had to lead the way back up to the mountain. Then the whole battalion headquarters came up behind us, where we established a base camp for the night. And I guess, and then that night, we were all feeling very, very flat, because normally Wommer was a terrific bloke. He was just a wonderful, he was a Thursday Islander. He came from Bowen in Queensland. I think he was a Thursday Islander. He came from Bowen in Queensland. He was married with 4 kids, and he was just a terrific NCO, terrific, and he was a real loss to us. And I'd known him for years. I knew him in 1 battalion when I was a digger. And we were all very, very flat and very down, and because Norm was known right throughout the battalion, not just in our company. And anyway, I was I was debriefed by the adjutant, and who was the assistant ops officer, and the operations commander, who was Max Carroll, and gave them a sort of a word picture very quickly as to where I thought things were. And the next day, John McAloney went down, who was a Salt Pioneer platoon, and of course he was hit again, and he also won a military cross, but he got hit again and lost one of his soldiers as well, Private D. Antone, where the enemy was still there. In other words, what they'd done, they'd retreated into the tunnels and then came out again, and John attacked this tunnel with a flamethrower. Because he was Assault Pioneers, he actually had a flamethrower. So he scorched them, what was left of them, I guess. And again, you sort of think, gee, these guys are still hanging around. It's just amazing, because normally they just take off. Anyway, then we got the engineers in, and once, the wounded of Assault Pioneers had been taken out, the next day we went down again, and we got a company up to help us do the search, and we discovered that, in fact, what we thought were Viet Cong were actually NVA, North Vietnamese 274 Regiment, and it was their regimental headquarters. And out of that, we found their radio, Nan Hung, who was their commander. We found the commander's radio with his logbook, and apparently it ended up being probably one of the most important intelligence discoveries in Vietnam during our tour of duty, because it showed exactly where this regiment had been and what they'd done and contact, etc., etc. And I went down into some of the tunnels with the engineers to have a look. And it was just amazing. There were underground hospitals, there were underground communication centres, there was underground kitchens. It was just a huge complex. And again, even today, we don't know how many people we hit, whether it was 3 or 30 or 130, I've got no idea. But it was probably one of the I'd say, most important in terms of the intelligence that they gathered, one of the most important discoveries that we had had in our trip to Vietnam at that time. This was October. So it was significant in terms of the intelligence that we gathered, but it was terribly sad in terms of soldiers that we lost, And even today, sometimes, I get the guilts, and I think, gee, is there some other way that I could have handled this situation without losing Norm Wommel? But everything I did was in accordance with the book, guns up on the high ground, reserve force behind me, assault force in front of me behind the assault force. That's the way you're taught, that's the way you do it. If you had your way all over again, and I guess again with the experience of time, because obviously, you learn as you go on, perhaps you would have taken it a bit slower, not as fast. But again, in terms of assaulting an enemy position, you don't do it slowly, you do it fast. That's the way you're taught. But in retrospect, looking back at that situation, perhaps if we'd done it more deliberately and slower and more fire and movement behind rocks and things, it may have ended up differently. I don't know. But, you can't go back in time and you can't recover what's done. All I know is that we lost a very good soldier.
That was just riveting. It really was. But we will come back and discuss elements of that. But how did the reconnaissance platoon come out of that?
Yes, well, I went back to base from that, and Dennis Rayner, who's another good mate of mine, another platoon commander, he also won an MC on that. We won 3 MCs on that operation. Mine was the first, then there was Peter McAloney, and then there was Dennis Rayner. And because Dennis also had a fairly major contact, he did brilliantly actually. He didn't lose anybody, and he probably shot about 12 or 15 of them, which is pretty good. The CO sent both Dennis and myself off to Saigon for Vietnamese National Day, where we had to march through Saigon. But he really sent us away to have a bit of a rest, just to do a bit of recovery time. And so both of us were away for the weekend. We just flew up there for the weekend, and we marched with the Vietnamese Armed Forces through Saigon on this Vietnamese National Day. And then when I came back from that, I was a bit more relaxed. I was still upset, but I was still a bit more relaxed. I was called up to the CO's office, and I'll never forget, there was a CO, the IO, the intelligence officer, who was Bob O'Neill, who's a Rhodes Scholar, very, very good IO. We had Peter Isaacs, who was the adjutant, and Max Carroll, who was my company commander. And they said, Mick, we'd like to see you form a reconnaissance platoon. Of course, I was just blown away. I thought, gee, how good is this? And they said, yep, we believe that there is a gap between SAS, which is 30,000 kilometres out, and the battalion, which is back here. And also with SAS, they would go into a position, they'd find some enemy activity, they'd fly out, they'd be debriefed at Task Force headquarters. By the time that information had been, if you like, dissected and analysed, and the information came down to us, and by the time we could get our battalion moving, invariably it was too late. So what our CO was looking for, he was looking for a unit from our battalion which could fill the gap, not take the job of SAS, they're totally different, but to fill the gap. In other words, as soon as SAS flies back and reports enemy activity in a particular area, we can fly out straight away and basically establish a little, if you like, a reconnaissance base ourselves to see if the movement is still there, not checking on SAS or anything else like that, but to report back to our battalion that, hey, there's still a lot of activity, you might as well come out and have a bit of a go at this. Otherwise, a battalion mobilises and comes out for nothing. So that's just a waste of a resource. So there was that part of the situation which was part of the brief. And the other one was to basically be the eyes and ears of the battalion. So if the battalion was operating in strength with companies, we could do some of the hard yards because we were smaller and not necessarily fitter, but probably better trained, where we could do some of the hard tasks like going up into the high ground, where rather than take up 100 men to clear a bit of high ground, I could take up 20, and we do the same job. And mostly the enemy weren't up there anyway because they stuck down to the river systems. but you couldn't afford to take the risk. You had to clear that high ground. So we got jobs where we could operate quickly and effectively as a smaller group, whereas a company going up there, again, would have been not the waste of a resource, but you would have been knocking diggers around unnecessarily. So there was that part of it. And the other part was to operate in small 4 or 5 man patrols, like SAS, but no more than 10,000 metres out. We always try and operate within artillery range, which was our direct fire support, which is 10,000 metres.
So what? Was this a new tactic for the army?
It was. It was the first. They'd had reconnaissance platoons in the order of battle in the past. Second World War, etc. But there was no reconnaissance platoon on the order of battle of the Australian Army at that time, and this was the first one that was formed. So it was a bit of a buzz, a bit of an honour, I guess. And the beauty is that ours was the first, and now the reconnaissance platoon is on the order of battle. So I guess the success that we had then gave other commanders, battalion commanders, the confidence to continue on with it. But now the reconnaissance platoon in every battalion is exactly on the order of battle. In other words, there is a reconnaissance platoon in every battalion. But in our time, it was a hunch by the CO. It was an experiment. It could have been a dangerous experiment too. It could have backfired. But luckily, in terms of the people that I ended up selecting, I ran a selection course, etc. I got the right people, very much so.
Well, can I just talk to you briefly about that selection process? Mm-hmm. What qualities were you looking for in these men?
Yeah, I was looking for fitness, physical fitness and commitment, and a mental hardness, a toughness, I guess, and good soldiers. Good with other soldiers, good with themselves, and also good with their weapons and their tactics. Interestingly enough, we sent my CO said, well, how do I do this? He said, go to the battalion, go around the battalion and get a group of volunteers. And I said, oh, okay. So we sent a signal out to all the company commanders looking for volunteers. Well, if you're a company commander, are you going to let your best soldiers go? No. Have you seen the movie The Dirty Dozen? Lee Marvin? Yeah, well, this was the Dirty 30. Seriously, the Dirty 30. I got a lot of guys from other companies that company commanders were quite prepared to see go. Because a bit like me, good soldiers, but occasionally social indiscretions, if you can call it that. Interestingly enough, I got soldiers into my platoon as NCOs who I was mates with as a digger. They came to my platoon. Blue Mulby, the guy that I said came second in the promotion course, he came over. Bob Carney, the guy that wrote Crossfire, he was in my section when I was a corporal. He came over. Harvey, he and I played rugby together. He came over. Bobby Searle, he and I were diggers together. He was in anti-tank platoon. He stayed. He was there. So it was very interesting where I got a mishmash of people from the other companies. And of course I had anti-tank platoon guys, And as I said, anti-tank on that particular contact up on the hill just performed admirably. There's no question about that. But I knew some of these guys simply would not make reconnaissance platoon. They were too old. They were too set in their ways. They were too comfortable sitting in Land Rovers with their armoured, their recoilless rifles used to knocking tanks out, So I just said, right, who wants to stay, who wants to go? And a few of them packed their bags and went. Saved me the hassle, so away they went. So we ended up with about 40, I guess. I made contact with SAS, with Major John Murphy, who was OC of 3 Squadron, and I took 3 SAS instructors down with me to Vung Tau, where I basically wrote a 2-week program. I had 2 weeks to put this thing together, where I drove them very hard. By that I mean we used to run through sandhills, early in the morning, after being on the grog the night before. I'd push them right through the sandhills until they could hardly walk, We'd run through water in our waist on the beach, just to get... I just wanted to sort them out physically. Who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. And then we did all the sort of SAS things, you know, our communications, our demolitions, our first aid, polished up on some of our language skills again, but principally the SAS tactics, you know, in terms of fire and movement and how slowly they move. I mean, see, an SAS patrol might only move 400 metres in a day, or 200 metres in a day, depending on the enemy position, you know. In the battalion, we weren't used to that because we're used to patrolling in strength, you know, as a company or a battalion size, and you go slow, but you go at a fair pace. You know, you might move 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 metres in a day. In SAS, because you're out there on your own and you really are basically reconnaissance and you're wanting to avoid contact, you've got to travel very, very slowly, and that's where we had to learn as small groups to travel very, very slowly. So we did that, and at the end of the period, I had almost like a board of studies that I had at Portsea myself, and I sat with a couple of the NCOs from SAS and said, look guys, you know, which of these do you think you know, is going to make the grade? We did patrols with SAS as well, out in the bush, so that they could observe the guys as well, and we came up with a list, and they came into my platoon, and the rest I sent back to their companies. And I didn't go back to their companies with any stigma or anything like that. It's just that, look, I'm sorry, I can only take so many. You know, if I could take X, I'd have X, but I've only got so many, so we sent the rest away. So I ended up, out of the 40, I think I probably ended up with something like about 27, 28, roughly.
That's a really interesting selection process that you went through. What personal qualities were you looking for? You mentioned before good soldiers.
Yes.
I mean, what makes a good soldier?
I think it's an attitudinal thing. You know, there's what I call the show ponies, and there's what I call the real draft horse, the real worker. And I didn't want show ponies. I didn't need show ponies. I needed real, you know, working horses, and just they don't complain. You know, they just get onto it, and there had to be, if you like, again from within these guys, there had to be that sort of commitment. And there had to be, again, if you like, a sense of adventure. In other words, we're getting into something really unknown here. We don't know how we're going to perform. We don't know whether it's going to be dangerous, or we don't know, etc., etc. So there's that fear of the unknown. And I was really looking for guys that could handle that and handle it on their own. In other words, and also what we trained to is if any of them got separated from any of their patrols, they had to get out on their own, you know, so they had to be good navigators. Definitely navigation was an important part. They had to be good communicators in terms of radio skills. Attitudinal, I think just a positive attitude, a can-do type attitude. A, can do myself, and B, we can do. So there was a sort of if you like, a team type spirit that I was looking for, something that I wasn't looking for super soldiers or anything like that. I was looking for people that could work together in a team, but be absolutely committed and do it in such a way as not to complain. And I guess I was very lucky in being able to select those guys.
And so you took them back to the battalion, and
yes.
What was your first operation?
Yeah, first operation was a very simple one. It was basically a patrol out east, where we were supporting one of the companies. I can't remember which company it was, but it might have been, it would have been in November, I think, from memory. Yeah, November. And it was purely to act as a screen in front of a company. I think it might have been D Company, Major Paul Greenhouse, where quite often they would attach us to a company, and then the company commander was encouraged to use us the way that we should be used, not as a normal platoon. So that, for instance, if D Company was advancing somewhere and there was a bit of dirt over here that needed checking out, they'd send us out to check it out, so the company commander could keep his company in, if you like, in structure and do his normal thing. We quite often too, a company would lay up and harbour up, and then we would go out in small groups around that company to act as either listening posts or ambush patrols. They were simple things that we did initially just so we could get the confidence, etc. But as time went on, the tasks became more, not onerous, wrong word, they became more demanding, basically, much more demanding.
And how did the relationship between the company and the platoon first work? I mean, the dynamics, how was that?
Initially there was, because, you know, we were like, as I say, we were the dirty 30 and we looked like banditos, the way we used to dress. I mean, you know, no helmets, just sweatbands around our head, no hats, just a sweatband tied, you know, like a sort of a patchy type headdress. We painted our weapons, camouflage, you know, all camouflage cream, etc. We mostly had American gear on, which we'd either purchased, borrowed or stolen. We had stacks of ammunition and weapons, and there's a reason for that. So, yeah, we looked like an odd bunch, I think. And originally, I think the diggers were fine. The diggers were probably a bit jealous at the start. You know, I've got to dress like this and they can dress like that. But the company commanders initially were a bit apprehensive. You know, I mean, you know, what are they going to do and what can they do that we can't do ourselves and all this sort of stuff. But once we'd managed to work with all the company commanders we had were fantastic. And once they got rid of some, you know, which I spoke about earlier, we ended up with some terrific company commanders. And once they had the confidence in us to do what we said we could do, they would ask for us and say, look, can we take Recce platoon? And that's why we spent so little time in the bush, so little time in camp. They used to keep us out because they knew in camp we'd always get into trouble, so they'd take us out. And B, all the companies would ask for us, so they'd take us out there and get us to do things. And after a while, we became just an integral part of the battalion and the battalion's activities, where there was no animosity or jealousy or any concern whatsoever. But initially there was a bit of sort of standoff, you know, who do these guys think they are?
Not jumping too far ahead, but it is relevant when talking about the platoon in itself. That notion of always being out and always being on demand, I mean, how much pressure did that place on the platoon? Oh,
enormous pressures, enormous. But again, because I was very lucky, I had a good leadership group in my platoon, and also because, again, this can-do attitude, it got to the stage where my platoon, the diggers in my platoon, or our platoon rather than our platoon, they used to be dissatisfied if they weren't being used. In other words, for them it was the challenge. They knew they were doing an enormous amount of time in the bush. They knew they weren't spending a lot of time in base, but it became almost like a fait accompli. It became a culture of the platoon that we're always out, we're always doing something. So it was a pride thing, and there wasn't any pressure at all. I mean, once we came back in the base, my God, we hung one on, you know, like we just hit the boozer and we'd relax for 1 or 2 days. But then as soon as we got over the hangover, we were already preparing for the next one. So we'd go out again. And it became almost like a cultural thing where we didn't want to be in base. We would rather be out on our own, basically.
Well, what was your first operation? What was the name of it?
Oh, God. First one would have been, I think, I'm just trying to think. You know, I can't remember.
Because I really want to take you back to hardihood, if I may, but I think we've just jumped far ahead.
That's all right. That's fine. Yeah. No, look, I can't remember the first one we did. I'd have to go back through the book or through my diaries, but the first one as Reconnaissance platoon would have been sometime in November. And I seem to recall it was a cordon and search exercise where we had to guide some people in to a cordon, which one of the villages, I can't remember which one.
Well, yeah, I mean, hardihood was you were with anti-tank platoon, is
No,
that?
A company, platoon A company on hardihood.
Right.
We're with the Americans. Okay. Well, basically, it was our first op, you know, and we're working with the Americans as well. And I must say that we were a bit terrified because one of the companies, the 1st 73rd Airborne Brigade, had been in a major contact in our area that we were going into, and they'd lost 60 guys. I mean, it was a huge contact. I think it was something like 30 killed and 30 wounded. So we knew that we were going into a pretty bad area. So for our first op, you know, it was a bit daunting. But we had the Americans there to help us, etc. But it all happened so quickly. I mean, rim choppers, rout of choppers, and we're sort of feeling our way and doing navigation in Singleton is one thing, doing navigation then in Vietnam is another. Getting the communications right, and a very steep learning curve for everybody in the battalion, an enormous learning curve. Thankfully, we had some good planning. I mean, we had some very, very good planning, the CO, the ops officer, the IO. And through that good planning, it meant that there was, if you like, less conflict, less clashes, etc. We lost our first national serviceman on that op. He came here from South Australia. His name was Errol Nowak. And that knocked us around a bit, you know, because he was a national serviceman. And I guess there was a bit of history being made at that time. And I guess from my part, you know, coming back to how you do things in Australia than how you do things in Vietnam, in the first contacts that I had in Vietnam, I used to walk around and you'd hear the crack, the bullets going over your head, and you're sort of walking around and you're saying, well, look, Jones, you know, Bill, get down there, and Harry, you know, just get the gun down this track, and you're directing traffic, almost, until I saw a Viet Cong get shot through the front of the head and it blew the back of his head out. And I thought, wow, that's what a bullet does. I had no idea what a bullet did, because we're conditioned a bit to the Westerns. I mean, look at the guys in the Westerns, you know, they get shot and they keep going, got 5 or 6 bullets in them and they keep going. Well, the bullets of today, they basically either blow your back out or just blow your arm off, you know. I mean, they are high speed and they do enormous damage. And I, as I say, I used to walk around in a contact until I saw what happened to this guy's head. And I thought, my God. So from that moment on, as soon as there was a shot fired, you'd have to be very, very fast to beat me to the ground. I'd get to the ground real quick. Because, again, it's a part of our training that we didn't do. We used to have these sort of mock-up wounds that, you know, we'd bandage up, etc. But it doesn't really do justice to what the real thing is. And I guess that was the biggest shock in terms of what a bullet can do to the human body. You think, my God, you know, I'm going to get to the ground real quick in future. So it changed my whole attitude in terms of my personal, if you like, initial reaction if we're being shot at.
And can I just clarify the purpose of Operation Hardihood?
Yes, it was to clear our area of responsibility of the enemy so that we could establish a firm base at Nui Dat. Nui Dat had been selected because it was high ground. It was also in the midst of a huge Pirelli or Michelin rubber plantation. It was well enough away from friendly villages, or so-called friendly villages, so that we could set up DFs, defensive fire positions around, etc., so we wouldn't disturb the local populace. It was located on a major north-south road. So it was purely an establishment of our firm base, which was our firm base for over 10 years. And
from the intelligence that you got from that briefing, how thick with VC was that area?
Well, actually, I think the Americans had done a very good job. I think they'd either shot them all, mind you, great casualties to themselves, or they decided to withdraw. and wait till the Americans had pulled out, because the Americans just had incredible firepower there with them. And I think the bad guys actually withdrew back into the jungle, waiting for the Americans to pull out so they could have a crack at us on our own. And that's exactly what happened, because that's how Long Tan happened. I was out there the day after Long Tan.
You were with 2 Platoon A Company for Hardyhood, and you've just explained the brief of Hardyhood. The area wasn't that secure when you first got there.
No. I mean, as I say, the 1st 73rd Airborne Brigade had some fairly major contacts in that region, so we didn't know what to expect. But obviously, when we first moved in, there were some contacts, but they were spasmodic. So I think the enemy withdrew to consolidate, to observe, to watch, and to pick their time to hit us, which they actually did in August with Battle of Long Tan against 6th Battalion.
And, well, how do you go about establishing the security of the area?
Well, initially, I mean, obviously it's a search and destroy. I mean, you're clearing areas of operations. You then find a place that you consider will be a good base to establish. You dig in, fire pits, weapon pits, command posts, etc. And you constantly patrol around that region. I mean, you have an area which is called a tactical area of responsibility, and each company has a tactical area of responsibility which you patrol to mortar range out, because the bad guys had mortars. So you patrol about 3,000 or 4,000 metres out to clear it on a fairly regular basis, daily actually, because that ensures that the enemy hasn't got a time to sort of build up in any particular area. You patrol only by day, not at night.
And how many would go out on that patrol?
Oh, they were sections. Sections of between 7 and 10, depends. Could be half platoons. Depends on the previous activity or reported activity of the enemy. So you patrol, on a regular basis. Every platoon, every company would patrol on a regular basis. Constant patrolling, actually, because that's the only way that you can secure an area. If you don't patrol, it gives the VC the opportunity to move back into an area. It gives them an opportunity to establish a mortar base plate, and then they mortar your position, create havoc, and then they take off. You see, so you've just got to constantly patrol your area of responsibility, and that's the only way you can have a secure base.
And at this point, what's your rank? And
I'm a lieutenant, 2nd lieutenant, a 1 pipper.
And what sort of maps or navigation aids were you using?
Oh, very simple. I had a map of the area which was covered in contact, so if it got wet it wouldn't disintegrate. We had different coloured crayon pencils, which were pilot's pens actually, which you could mark positions on the map, and they didn't wash off with water. They were like a sort of an oil-based type thing. Very simple prism compass, one that you actually look through like that, and a protractor, basically, to measure distance and also to measure angles on a map. That's all we had. I mean, there was nothing else. No GPS systems in those days. And the other thing we had was some of us had sheep counters, so that you can count the steps, because in jungle areas with a canopy and very flat and no visible noticeable features, very, very easy to get lost or to get confused in terms of your navigation.
So during these patrols on Hardyhood, was there any getting lost for you?
Not for me, but a few other people did, yes. Company commanders, actually. But no, I didn't have. I don't know what it is. Look, I've been out. I've been out in terms of my navigation, but I used to have a little trick that I used to use to find my way again, and that's I'd call in artillery, and I'd call in artillery on somewhere where I knew I wasn't, In other words, you always know when you're not on a mountain, right? So I would call in artillery and to a particular target, and it would hit the target where I knew that I wasn't. Obviously, you're not going to call it in on yourself. And of course, there's the primary. So there's the primary and the secondary of artillery. The primary is where it gets shot, and the secondary is where it lands. And if you do that and you're very quick with it, you quickly shoot a bearing to the primary, you shoot a bearing to the secondary, because you know where your primary is, because you know where your fire base is, and you know where you're not, and then you just basically a back bearing from both locations back, and it gives you a little triangle of error, and roughly that's where you're at.
That's a good trick.
Yes, I use it quite often, actually. Use it quite often. Artillery never knew why I did it. I think it's about time they knew. I used to basically just call in a target. I'd say I wanted a sort of one gun fire for effect, just as a sort of a register a target. I wanted to sort of, there's silent registration of targets and there's noisy registration of targets. If I was a little bit confused with I was confused. I was confused with my navigation. I needed the confidence to know where I was to go to the next step. I would sometimes call in arty on that basis just to shoot those back bearings, so I knew roughly where I was at.
So you learnt this trick fairly early on?
Yeah, quite by accident. Nobody taught me. I just common sense. I think to myself, well, if I know that the given spot on a map is where the fire base is, because we've got that recorded on our map, and I know I'm not sitting on top of a mountain, and I used to do it, the targets in such a way so that there was if you like, say 90-degree angles, so you have this triangle of error that comes in. So I'd find a feature that was somewhere off to my, say, east or west, and I knew that I wasn't on a mountain, or I knew I wasn't in a river, creek bed or something. I'd just call that target in, and it'd go bang and bang, and you just shoot your bearings. You then do a back bearing, and then you draw it in on the map, and you say, right, I'm in that grid square right there. Now, grid square is 1,000 metres square. If you knew what grid square you're in, at times you're doing very, very well, because you'd never call in artillery that close anyway. You wouldn't call in artillery. You might walk it in. You'd walk artillery, and once the first round was on the ground, and you felt that you were safe, and there was enemy contact, because I used to use a lot of artillery, you then slowly start to walk it in. But in terms of as a navigation aid, it's fantastic. It's a way to do it.
And they always responded? Absolutely.
Artillery over there were fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I think with a lot of the battery in direct support of us, there's a bit of the old recce platoon in those guys. I mean, they're sitting on a gun line, they want to do what they're paid to do. They want to get out there and fire their guns, that's what they're trained to do. And there's nothing worse than digging your guns in on some fire support base and not being in a position to fire your guns. I mean, artillery is there to fight a war as well, and they fight best with artillery pieces. So I think with them too, there is a sort of something that drives them, which basically says, hey, look, here's a fire call, let's get out there and let's do it.
So these patrols you're doing during Heidi Horde in those early days, they're just day patrols?
Yeah, mostly day patrols, yep. Yeah, search and destroy. I mean, in those days we'd find things like rice caches, the bad guys would have rice either buried in underground that we'd find, or we'd just find them in a bamboo clump with covered in black plastic. And what we'd do is we'd just get that rice and either destroy it, or if it was destroy it as best we can, or we'd get, we'd ring up and somebody would come out and pick it up and give it to the villagers, and the villagers would then give it back to the Viet Cong. So it became a bit of a circular argument. So after a while, what I used to do is just blow it up, and not give it back to the villagers.
And why was that?
because the villagers, you give the rice back to the villagers, and then the Viet Cong come into the villages and take it back off them, and it ends up being in another rice cache. So you're better off destroying it. Sad, but that's the way it is.
And the point was to starve the VC, or?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the VC couldn't operate without being supported by the villagers, and they mostly had the support of the villagers through terrorism. Well, if the villagers didn't have any rice to give them, well, they've got to go and get it somewhere else.
So you're saying that they're quite large rice caches?
Oh, huge, yeah. I mean, one that we found, I think, would have been 20 tonnes of rice. Big rice caches. Bag upon bag upon bag, and just covered with black plastic in a bamboo clump where you wouldn't see it from the air, definitely not see it from the air. And just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere. So the Viet Cong would come in there, and they got a bit smart after a while. They started booby-trapping them with grenades and stuff, so you had to be a bit careful. So as people start to pull bags off and there's a grenade, next minute you've got a casualty.
And it would have taken quite a bit to blow it up.
Oh yes, yeah, you get engineers in, they're the experts at that. And they come in, they used to love doing that. Engineers love blowing things up. And you'd sort of fire on and boom, and there's rice going everywhere, But as I say, that's one of the tragedies of war, you've got to waste food like that.
So on those day patrols that you're doing, what sort of pack would you take with you?
Oh, we'd always take our normal gear. I mean, there was sort of what we call the bum pack, and not with your big shoulder pack. And your bum pack always had the basics in there. You'd always have a day's rations. You'd always have your first aid gear. You'd always have your spare ammunition and water. You'd always have a poncho because you never knew if you had to stay out there overnight. But it was very much what we call lightweight patrol gear, so that you can move fairly quickly and quietly through a given area without having the encumbrance of the huge backpack.
And as you mentioned, this is an establishing operation, and quite a lot of companies all going out at once to secure the area.
Yep.
So how would you avoid having company clashes?
Yeah, well, that was a problem. I mean, friendly fire is a hazard of war, and we had several incidents of friendly fire, I'm sure. We had incidents of friendly fire between companies, and we had also incidents of friendly fire killing our own people with artillery as well, and mortars. So it's a hazard of war. It really is a hazard of war. Now, in terms of friendly fire between companies, I mean, that invariably is not caused through bad planning by a battalion, because a battalion gives enough room between companies to operate where that should not happen. But because of the, if you like, at times, problems with navigation, it's very easy all of a sudden to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then somebody hears a twig crack or something, and you just turn around and go bang, and next minute you've got a friendly casualty. So it's an unfortunate, and if you look at just the recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, I mean, friendly fire is a problem, and it's not just a problem with Americans. I mean, we have it too, and it's just one of the hazards of war. In terms of artillery and mortars, I mean, when that happens, that's just bad management by the company commander. Just bad. Shouldn't happen. Should never happen. I mean, if you know where you are and you call in artillery, well, you should never blow up your own people. But if you don't know where you are, or you think you are where you are, and then you call in artillery and a round lands in your company position, well, then you are the man that's responsible. Unfortunately, what happened a lot in Vietnam, not a lot, but it happened a couple of times, it happened once to me, was that because the ground in the wet season is just so soft and muddy, for instance, a mortar base plate is just what it is. It's a base plate, and it's got a big knob on it, and the mortar sits there. and it's got the tripod that keeps it there. Well, you get if the mortar's like that, and you bed the mortar in, you should get a couple of rounds away, and then it goes further and further back. So the trajectory goes higher, but the distance is less. So there's always a danger of a drop short with a mortar that is not bedded in properly in terms of, say, soft ground. And that's not the fault of any mortar man or anything else. They bed them in as best they can, but sometimes there's that give. With artillery, there was a couple of incidents when I was there where the artillery dropped short. That's their nickname, drop shorts. It was, again, just poor management, and I think what they did change in my time was that before any rounds went off, the gun sergeant or the troop commander or whatever, he would actually check the barrel angle with a clinometer to make sure it was at the right angle before rounds were actually fired. So it's just one of those physical things that you have no control over. But I think effective management can basically stop that sort of stuff.
Well, how would you be briefed on the whereabouts of other companies before you would go out on those platoons?
Yeah. I mean, part of your briefing, there's things that you never forget: situation, mission, execution, command and SIGs, admin and log. They're the sort of the normal operation order. And situation is always enemy forces and friendly forces. And you're always told where the friendly forces are. And so you're very aware of it. And of course, in those days, we used to wear little coloured bands in our hats so that we could identify our own troops. But we used to change the bands because the enemy used to wear them as well. Very smart. So we wear gold ones and red ones and blue ones so that, if we were in somewhere and through the jungle all you could see was, a hat. If you saw the blue, which you knew you were wearing for that particular operation, well, you knew it was one of your friendly forces. If it was a different colour, you'd shoot him. Simple.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about those colour identifications and that they were easy to spot even through the jungle. Mm-hmm. Why was that?
Oh, look, I think, again, one of the things you're trained to do is to not look at jungle, look through it. So there's a skill in looking through jungle. So in other words, if you see somebody with a hat, and because you're very conscious of your own forces, if you're in a free fire area and you're the only one out there, well, there's a danger of that person getting shot. But if you know that you're in somewhere in reasonable proximity, friendly forces, you just look through and you just see the hat. And it saved a lot of soldiers, definitely saved a lot of soldiers. Because the Viet Cong or the NVA used to wear green hats like ours too sometimes. And, again, he who hesitates is lost. And if he's got a weapon and you've got a weapon, it's the one that gets the quickest round away that survives. So the old headband was a very, very important part of unit identification.
And what were the other tricks, I guess, of moving through the jungle that you learned in those early operations?
Oh, bamboo is a bugger of a thing to get through. There's lantana, which is a terrible thing to get through, and after a while, you tend to, you're almost animal-like. You're almost sort of picking your way through very carefully so that you don't have bamboo pricks on your shoulders and lantana tying you up with your weapon. You're folding foliage back as you're moving through very slowly. You're very careful in terms of where you put your feet, A, in terms of mines and booby traps, and B, in terms of if you're in the dry season in particular. If you're very closing to the enemy in the dry season, you can put your foot down on a twig and it breaks, or a leaf that makes a noise. You're just very, very conscious of movement in the jungle, and you develop almost animal instincts, in my view, where you are just in survival mode. Your adrenaline's going to 100 miles an hour, and you are just basically doing things that come naturally to you, and they can't be taught. I mean, certainly in terms of where you put your feet and everything else, that can be taught, but in terms of making your way through bamboo and stuff, it's experience. You just find a way through. And the thing is, the person at the front, especially the forward scout, he is very important, because he is actually then making the route for the rest of you to come through. So invariably the forward scout has to be the most experienced in terms of finding their way through the jungle, or through areas which are considered to be a little bit uncomfortable.
And would you maintain radio silence, or?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, as much as possible. As much as possible. I mean, we'd always be on air, but we try and be as quiet as we possibly can. I mean, if once I went to Recce platoon, well, my patrol had 2 radios. I mean, we had one where I basically controlled my 3 other patrols, because I was one of the 4th patrol, and the other one where I had a rear link back to my battalion, where I could talk to my battalion direct, or I could just flick the frequency and talk direct to air support, artillery, naval support, whatever I wanted.
And with 2 platoon?
With 2 platoon, all I had was 1 radio, which gave me back to my company commander, basically. And there were no radios between the sections. The sections are all visual communications and hand signals and stuff like that. If a section went out on their own to do a listening post, which is like an observation post early warning system, they would take out their own radio. But generally a platoon just had 1 radio.
And still staying with 2 platoon, what sort of hand signals or communication signals do you use?
Oh, the whole range. I mean, they're all standard hand signals that are used in the army. The position is clear, enemy, stop, listen, have a look. Then I'd start this one, nose, or we go smoko, or brew up, or down, or up, or all simple things. Principally, the important ones for us were sort of this, stop, or that. That's the one that used to get the best reaction. As soon as you do that, guys very slowly would just go to ground and look out either side just to see, and then you'd communicate again with hand signals as to me, like Platoon Commander, going for recce, going for a look. So you'd move slightly forward of the platoon or section or patrol and have a bit of a look, and you come back and you realise that all was clear, and then you just say move on. And that's why one of the things that was interesting with Crossfire, when they wrote Crossfire, one of the titles they were going to give that book was Stop Whispering, because when we used to come back off patrol into base camp, we'd still be talking like this. And then the guys that had been in base, who were either resting or had some infections or something, would say, "Why are you whispering?" Because you've been out for 3 or 4 weeks and everything's like this. So I'd say, "Stop whispering." That's right. So you look, the Australians, in terms of jungle warfare and fire movement in the jungle and tactics, are amongst the best in the world, if not the best in the world. And we've learnt the hard way. I mean, we've learnt from the Kokoda Trail, the Japanese, Borneo, Malaya, and if you look at our sort of whole areas of influence, and if you like our whole areas of likely confrontation in years to come, it's all jungle. And I think they're skills that we have picked up since the Second World War, and they're skills that we will continue to use and have to use. And it really is a different sort of warfare entirely to what you've seen on the TV at Iraq, with tanks thundering along at sort of 60 miles per hour.
And what was your weaponry when you were with 2 platoon?
Yeah, very simple actually. I mean, when I first went over there, I had a thing called an OMC, which was an Owen machine carbine, which is a 9mm Second World War weapon with 2 little handles and a wonderful, fun weapon, you know. But in one of the contacts that I had, I actually put almost a full magazine into a VC who ran away. I suddenly realised that this was not a very good weapon. You know, just didn't stop people. The rounds were too slow, it was too clumsy, it was too awkward, and it was inaccurate. Either I was inaccurate, I was shaking too much, but I got him because there was a blood trail, you know. But an OMC didn't stop him. Whereas later on, I got an Armalite, you know, that stopped people in their tracks. So initially, the OMC, although it's a lovely old weapon and very reliable, it was simply not suitable for what we had to do. A bit awkward too to carry, whereas the M16, the Armalite, just I think, fantastic weapon.
Well, we might talk more about the Armalite later, but just in those early days, I'm wondering, can you recall the first time you fired your weapon?
Yeah, well, exactly. That was that was that episode where we're in very close quarters, and it was with 2 platoon, and there was, I think, 2 or 3 of the bad guys, and the forward scout had, I think, got a few rounds away, and then I got up with him, and I got the whole magazine of this OMC away, and we found a blood trail, but we didn't find a body. So obviously, and definitely we hit him. I mean, there's no question about it because of the blood trail. But my gun didn't stop him. Whereas an Armalite, had you done that with an Armalite and fired at 600 rounds a minute, you would have stopped him in his tracks. But the OMC was a bit cumbersome at that stage.
And do you remember that feeling, what was going on and what were you thinking when you...
Oh, exhilaration. Absolute exhilaration, you know. I mean, it was... not that I was kill happy in terms of little Viet Cong hats on a 44-gallon drum, as some people did, but it's what I was trained to do. It's what I was paid to do, and as a platoon commander, it's what I had to do. And have that contact and have the first kill, yeah, it gave me a buzz, I must admit. Yeah, I didn't have any qualms or anything about it at all. In fact, I conditioned myself. You know, I conditioned myself where the Viet Cong, as far as I was concerned, they were the lowest form of vermin imaginable. If I'd thought of them as a human being, I wouldn't have been able to do what I did, because I have respect for my fellow man and woman. But in treating them subconsciously as vermin, and worse than a mangy dog, no problems at all shooting them. None at all. Because as far as I was concerned, they had to be exterminated, they had to be eliminated, and some of the terrible things that they were doing in terms of the villages, to their villages and to women and children and everything else, I had no conscience or qualm or whatsoever in terms of putting those guys away. None at all. But it was a conditioning that I had to go through. Again, if I felt that I thought of them as human beings like me, there might have been some hesitation at times. Because it's not in our nature to go around shooting people. It's just not in our nature.
So, would you be able to smoke when you were out?
Oh yes. Yeah, I let the guys have a smoke, my word. I think, I didn't smoke at that time. I stopped smoking through water polo, basically. We'd sort of say, take 5 or, take 10. But you'd always take your rubbish with you. You wouldn't leave any butts or anything like that. You'd sort of put it in your pouch and take it with you. And I guess in retrospect today, now you thought about it. See, the other thing too is that we could smell their cigarettes because they smoke very strong Galliano French cigarettes, very, very strong. And I could smell those about 50 metres. They were just so pungent. Most of our guys smoked the cigarettes that came out of the American ration packs. They actually used to have little cigarettes in the ration packs, like Salem, Winston, Philip Morris, etc. And they were all fairly mild sort of cigarettes. You know, you really couldn't smell them unless you were really right on top of them. But it was all sort of par for the course in those days. I mean, as a platoon, in terms of reconnaissance platoon, it was a bit different. They were a totally different set of circumstances.
Well, we'll come and talk about that later, but I'm just wondering, when you did harbour down and brew up, when you did stop and brew up and have a smoko, would that give your own position away? Yeah,
what we would always do is we'd always go into a harbour. We wouldn't just stop on the side of the road. I mean, if we're on patrol and we felt we were reasonably secure, you might stop not on the road because hardly moved on roads, but sort of a little track or something. You might just basically have escorts out to the flanks and establish a harbour, all-round protection like that, which was a improvised quick harbour, and guys would just quickly get their hexie and have a brew and maybe a cigarette and a bit of cheese and a biscuit and then get on patrol again. If we went into a night harbour, because what we used to do, we would never harbour up through the course of the day, because that's what gives you position away. So what we would do is we'd stop at around about 4 o'clock and we'd have our dinner, you know, like make a curry and all sorts of food on the hexie stove, etc. We would be in a natural harbour position. We would have our sentries out and we'd all have time to eat. We'd all clean our weapons. I'd check all my targets, I'd check my codes, and I'd get ready for the evening's activities. And as soon as the light was starting to go down, I'd already picked where we're going to actually sleep that night. We'd never stay where we had dinner, never. We'd then move off at last light until it was almost dark, and then basically camp or harbour up in an area at night. And then in the morning, you'd get up first thing in the morning, and you'd immediately, as soon as it was first light starting to appear, you'd move out. And you wouldn't have breakfast there. You'd move out and you'd stop somewhere else to have breakfast. This way you're one jump ahead of the enemy all the time. Where, in other words, if you're stopping somewhere and you're eating and there's smells of food and hexamine cooking, etc., and the enemy knows that you stayed there, they stumble across you almost by accident. They then go back and get some of the other bad guys and establish a mortar base plate. You get mortared. Well, that's fine, providing you've already moved. So we would then move, and then if they came back, we'd already gone. And the same in the morning. You've been sleeping there all night, you know, and guys, you know, moving, and there's always a bit of noise. And if the enemy knew that you were there, they'd try and attack you at first light. You know, so we would move out before first light. We'd already gone. And then we'd stop somewhere where we felt secure, and that's where we'd have breakfast. So it's constant movement all the time to try and be 1 or 2 steps ahead of the enemy.
And how well would you sleep overnight?
Not well. I mean, if I got 2 hours a night, I'd be lucky. Yeah, because there's pickets and sentry, and you've got to share sentry duties with the diggers, and you know, if you've got 2 hours, 2-3 hours, you'd be really lucky. And this is constant, absolutely constant. And even now, I'm still a very early riser, and I still sleep very light. I don't sleep heavy at all. Unless I've had a few drinks, then I sleep heavy.
And what would you use for a bed at night?
I used to just wrap myself up in a poncho cover, that's all. I tried all of the old tricks. Initially when we went there, we had those blow-up mattresses. I refused to allow them to be taken out because they're too noisy. When people move around on them, they creak and make a noise. So I said, well, you can take the mattress, but you've got to take the blow-ups out, so there's no point. You know, it's just flat, hard ground. I'd always dig a little hip hole for my hip, just a little hip hole. Then I'd just put down my poncho, and I used to have a parachute silk, just very light silk from a parachute, which I'd sort of wrap around me, and I'd just roll myself up and sleep on my pack, and that was it. There was no tent. We never put tents up at night on patrol, never. We'd always be sleeping very, very close to the ground. And the other thing is that when it rains, it really rains, like it's monsoon, and you just keep sleeping. I mean, you just stay in the wet. It's amazing. And you really develop this real animal instinct, you know, where, and also, if you like, a frame of mind where nothing really is uncomfortable. You're still alive, so nothing is uncomfortable. So even if you're sleeping in the wet, it doesn't disturb you, it doesn't worry you. You get up the next day and you're absolutely soaking, but you're going to be soaking anyway, patrolling the next day because of the temperature and the humidity. So very primitive conditions, very primitive conditions. So there's no sort of fancy bed and stretchers or tents or anything like that. Because tents can be seen through the jungle. Close to the ground, nothing can be seen really. If there's a bit of ground cover, you're very, very secure.
Did you feel secure?
Yeah, most of the time. Most of the time, because I used to find the most horrible place to harbour up. You know, in the middle of a bamboo clump, I would harbour up because I knew the enemy wouldn't come in there. Seriously, I mean, we would find the most horrible bit of dirt imaginable to harbour up because the enemy simply would not be able to attack and get in there. So we quite often would lay up or harbour up in places where, you know, nobody else would, but I used to, because they were nature's natural defences. So why not use them? And after a while too, you know, what I found with me anyway, I started to think like them. I really did start to think like them, and I became a guerrilla in a guerrilla war. So I started to do things which were a little bit out of the ordinary.
Such as?
Such that, as an example. I mean, quite often you'll find people tend to harbour up in comfortable areas. And I never used to find a comfortable area, because a comfortable area quite often also is an area which has easier access to the enemy if they want to attack you, or, you know. So I used to just get to places which are really uncomfortable, and we used to make them comfortable in terms of sleeping there ourselves, but they were very uncomfortable to try and get into. And also, I mean, if heavens, now in retrospect, also if we got hit by the enemy, they'd also be hard to get out of too, so it was a double-edged type sword. We couldn't run quickly, put it that way. Because bamboo's a terrible thing, I mean, especially the spiky bamboo. And we used to just get in there underneath and we just sleep there. And no way would the enemy come and attack you in an area like that. So they certainly wouldn't stumble into you, put it that way. And that's always a risk, where they just stumble into your position. But in something like that, they wouldn't do it. They also go, VC always follow tracks. They always follow tracks. Very rarely will they go through the bush, because a lot of them didn't have compasses. So all they had was local knowledge. The VC, NVA is different, but the VC would mostly use tracks, etc. And that's why we, you know, ambush so many of them, because that's their principal form of navigation.
We're talking about Operation Hardihood, and I was just wondering if you could just describe for me some of the tactics that you set out with.
Yeah, well, it was principally platoon tactics, because we're operating as a platoon within a company environment. We're patrolling as platoons, but the real tactic is at section level. I mean, in Vietnam, I think probably, you know, two of the most important command structures that imaginable was Platoon Commander and Section Commander. I mean, Company Commander, Battalion Commander, all very, very important, but they're operating in a totally different role. Not as much hands-on per se, whereas Section Commander, he is at the first point of contact, and then the Platoon Commander has to take charge after that, and then later the Company Commander gets involved. So most of our tactics at that time were platoon tactics and then section tactics, and mostly in the form of pre-trained contact drills. You know, contact right, contact left, ambush right, ambush left, and you did things instinctively. They were things that were instinctive, which in a peacetime environment are good in terms of instilling a certain degree of discipline and training, so that people move instinctively under fire. It's the same as throwing yourself out of an aircraft. You do that instinctively, not naturally. I guess where we had to adjust in Vietnam was that sometimes when you went into those contact drills, I mean, the enemy had set booby traps, they'd set mines, all sorts of things. So you had to modify the tactics a little bit to cope with the local conditions. And the local conditions, I mean, they didn't play by the rules. I mean, they were guerrillas, and they didn't play by the rules. So after a while, we didn't play by the rules either. So we changed our tactics slightly in terms of what we'd originally been taught here in Australia.
So what were some of the key things you learned when you came away from that operation?
A little bit about myself, I think, as a person. I mean, yes, I can do it. That's the first thing. I learned a lot about my soldiers and section commanders, those that could hack it and those that couldn't, and a few that couldn't. And I guess also I learned at that time too that that we had some weaknesses at the higher level, at company level, and I just knew that at that time I was going to have difficulty at that level dealing with the company commander because I just didn't feel he knew what he was doing, to be honest, and it was proven to be correct.
Did you come across in that operation any Viet Cong huts or bases?
Oh yeah, quite a few. Yeah, quite a few. I mean, we found many, if you like, well not but they were actually dug defensive positions of the Viet Cong, which they had vacated. But also a lot of huts and things, and in those days, what would happen it was crazy actually, because of the nature of the war. Pre an operation, what we would do, we'd throw leaflets out saying, there's going to be an operation, get out of the area. So in other words, hello, because we're worried about shooting friendlies, But my view in those days was that there were no friendlies, and if they were in the free fire area, they were gone, because you couldn't afford to take the risk. So what would happen is pre-operation, if there were friendly villages in the area and we were going to go in and do a search and destroy exercise, we'd actually send leaflets out of aircraft asking them to either surrender or move out because we were moving in. So the security in that aspect was pretty stupid actually, but they were the rules of engagement, and that's what we had to do. We couldn't just go into an area and assume that everybody was enemy and blast the hell out of them, because there could have been mums and dads and little kids that weren't Viet Cong at all. But that's where I struggled, where we basically advertised the fact that we were going to be operating in a particular area. Well, obviously, either the enemy would take off or they'd wait for us and ambush us, which is exactly what happened. So it was a crazy way to fight a war, really.
And I was going to ask, like, the major problems that came up with that tactic.
Major problem. I mean, I'd hate to think how many innocent people we killed. I'd hate to think, really. If I thought about it, it'd probably distress me, because when you're in an area that you assume is what we call a free fire area, you assume that everybody in there is a bad guy. And I know for a fact we shot people up that weren't bad guys. But the man that's at the front, this forward scout, and he's actually on a very, very fine line. And if he hears something and he gets off a round of shots, and then we do a sweep through, we find a person that's had their head blown off. I mean, what do you do? The person shouldn't have been there. Yet we didn't find any weapons or any ammunition or anything. The person was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was just one of those unfortunate, the Americans call it collateral damage, and the collateral damage in Vietnam was enormous, quite enormous actually.
That's one of the dilemmas of this war, is that defining or determining who the enemy was
it's difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, you'll be riding on an APC, a track, like an armoured personnel carrier, and here's little people in the fields, with their little hats on and, their black pyjamas and with a hoe and working in the rice paddies, etc., and they're looking and they're smiling. And as you're going along, you're thinking, Jesus, I wonder if I'm going to meet up with you tonight somewhere in an ambush. You just didn't know who the friendlies were, and you didn't know who the enemy was. So my view to my soldiers, and I was quite clear on this, as far as I'm concerned, in the bush they're all enemy. Because I wasn't about to sort of get into a debate with someone. Next minute, one of my soldiers gets killed because he's taken the soft option. So I'd always say take the hard option, because if it wasn't a free fire area, the good guys should not have been there. unfortunately, communications in Vietnam amongst the villagers is not good. And I think some of them strayed out to get bananas or to get some pawpaws or mangoes or to get firewood even, simple thing like that. And unfortunately they come across a patrol occasionally and they get killed. Very sad, but that's the collateral damage of Vietnam, unfortunately.
How did they ever make themselves known to be innocent or?
Well, very hard when they're dead. You know, I mean, once they've been shot, that's it. I mean, we didn't know. I mean, the thing is, you really don't ever really know. I mean, because they're not carrying a gun, doesn't make them friendlies. I mean, they could be a courier, they could be just a spy, a reconnaissance situation, giving the appearance of being an innocent wood gatherer or something. You just don't know. And I wasn't prepared to take the risk with my guys. I'm not proud of it, but I wasn't prepared to take the risk. I said, look, this is a free zone, free fire zone area. If there's anything out there that's bad, shoot it. Shoot first, ask questions later. Because if there's that hesitancy, you know, oh, is it or isn't it? You know, bang, next minute you've lost a guy. And I don't think you can afford to have that on your conscience. I'd rather have those people that perhaps were innocent on my conscience rather than my people.
You said that they would then ambush it at night.
Mm-hmm.
Once they knew that you were coming through. What were you? I mean, these are the very early on in your time in your tour. So what were you learning about VC tactics from these ambushes?
That they normally didn't stop to fight. They'd shoot and scoot. They'd take off. That they were very good at using booby traps. They were very good at sucking us in. That was part of the tactic. And very rarely did I physically follow up. I'd always use artillery. I wouldn't follow up. Because it's the oldest tactic in the world, where there's only one or two of them and they open up and you shoot and they run and then you run after them. Next minute you run into an ambush. I never used to do that. If I didn't get them in the first burst of fire, I thought, well, there's two of them gone. But then immediately I'd call in artillery or mortars and put it behind them to act as a block, hoping that they'd run into that, or also hoping that if there was a larger force concentrated further down the track, that our artillery or mortars would get them. And that's happened several times where I've been proven to be correct. So, you know, I think the principal tactic of the VC was to shoot and scoot, to run. The NVA were different. The NVA would basically stop and fight. And the interesting thing that I noticed, the difference between VC and NVA, VC were not well disciplined. They were tough, very tough, but not well disciplined. And certainly in terms of shooting at you, they'd shoot very high. That's why I used to walk around, because the bullets are going up through the trees. The NVA, the North Vietnamese, would shoot about this high off the ground. Totally different training, and that's why they were much more effective, because when they shot, invariably they got somebody, because their rounds were no more than, say, 2 or 3 feet off the ground.
So was it at Queenbian that you really started to see the difference between the VC and the NVA? I
think so, yes, because all of my contacts up to that point in time, to the best of my knowledge, had very much been with VC. Local D445 Battalion, basically guerrillas recruited from the local area, you know, ostensibly the eldest sons of families, farmers by day and VC by night. And then when we hit the NVA unit up in Queenbian, you just knew this was not VC, because they didn't run, they stopped and fought. And they fought because they had something to protect. It was their brigade commander and also their radio and logs and codes and all sorts of things. So I realised that in terms of the tactics that I had to employ and the sort of, if you like, the training that I had to do with my guys, we just have to change a little bit the way that we worked. With the VC initially, we were a bit blasé, if I can say that. In other words, these are only cowboys, don't worry about it, you know. Still careful and still terribly scared, but a little bit more risky in terms of some of the decisions that we used to make. Whereas with the NVA, we just knew we're up main force, and we knew we're up against very well-trained soldiers, and we just had to be a little bit more circumspect in terms of the decisions that we made.
Well, you also said earlier that you could smell
Absolutely.
the enemy. At what stage do you develop this instinct?
Yeah, look, it's a sixth sense that I developed. There's no question about it. And some of my fellow platoon commanders developed it as well, but I think I really developed it. Dennis Rayner, who's my mate in WA, he developed it very well. It's almost twofold. It's almost an instinct where, you know, when a dog is angry or senses danger and the hair sticks up on the back of their neck, my hair used to prickle up on the back of my neck, and also I used to smell them. I could smell them from a fairly great distance because of, they use drop pits as toilets. Their diet was pretty horrendous when it comes to toilets, fish heads and stuff. Their soap, they used to use soap, and they used to use a hair oil, a sort of almost like Californian poppy. Used to be an old hair oil that, you know, we used to use when we were younger, like Brill cream type thing. And they used to use that in their hair to sort of get spruced up occasionally, and you could really smell that. You could certainly smell their food if they were cooking in a village, and you could smell the fire as well. But it was more their personal smell. It was a food that they used to eat. Nook Mam, which is a fish sauce, lots of chilli and garlic, it used to come out through their pores and their skin. And you could sort of smell that from, I reckon, 20 or 30 metres, easy. In terms of the intuition, that sixth sense, I can't explain that. All I know is as the tour went on, my sixth sense became far more acute, to the point where sometimes I would just stop and everybody else would stop, and I'd just go, listen, like this, and we'd all listen, and then I'd say, go to ground, and we'd all go to ground, and I'd just say, be quiet, and we'd all just quietly sit there for 15, 20 minutes. Lo and behold, all of a sudden 3 or 4 guys would walk past. Now, how do you explain that? You know, it's got to be an animal sense. It's not mental in terms of you know, being a psychic. It's just an animal instinct where I don't feel comfortable here. I think there's somebody here. I think we'll stop. I think we'll go to ground. I think we'll be very quiet and we'll just observe for a while. And sure enough, several times that happened. A group of guys would go by. So I think the human body has been conditioned through evolution to lose that sixth sense. I mean, I'm a country boy, and I mean, I had a horse called Dolly, for instance. And one day we're riding back to the homestead, and all of a sudden Dolly took off. She was an old mare, 15 years, and she never used to bolt at all. But she took off. Next minute, there's this huge gum tree that crashed. It was a dead gum tree that crashed down behind where we were. Now, she didn't hear anything. She didn't see anything. She just had that instinct and she took off. Now, I think we've got those basic instincts as well, which are now well and truly lost through evolution and modern technology and time. But I think when you get into if you like, a scary situation where you really are on survival mode and you're really living on adrenaline, etc., I think that sixth sense slowly starts to come back, where you do start to develop very, very keen instincts. I mean, women have got it. I mean, women have got instinct much better than men in terms of mostly instincts about people, instinct about things. I think men, being principally, if you like, the hunter-gatherer, have got natural instincts or had natural instincts in terms of the hunting and the gathering. And I just think in Vietnam during that period of time, that's definitely something that I developed, no question about it.
And were there men in your platoon who had also developed the instinct?
Not as acute as me. And the reason I say that, I mean, I don't know, we haven't done a test on it, you know, but I think the reason they didn't develop it as acute as me is that they had different responsibilities. I mean, I had responsibilities for 30 men, and I felt that was an enormous responsibility. And what I was looking for was, if you like, an extra edge. I was looking for a leading edge. And I think in terms of my sense of responsibility for my soldiers, and also the fact that, you know, I didn't want to be responsible for losing any more, you know, because I'd already lost one. I just had I put that extra burden on myself to make sure that I didn't lead them into an ambush, etc. So I think it was a combination of adrenaline and survival and responsibility that just brought this thing to the fore. Whereas a lot of my diggers really relied on me. You know, they relied on their patrol commanders, and they didn't have to develop it as much as me. I think there was a different need for them.
Well, just picking up on that point about losing men, did you lose any men in hardihood?
No, I didn't lose anybody on hardihood. No, I was very lucky. I mean, in fact, 2 Platoon 8 Company did not lose one person in Vietnam, and which I'm really pleased about, because even after I left them, 2 Platoon Commanders went down, and they were guys that I knew and they were good blokes. But before we went away, I actually met a lot of the parents of those national servicemen, and I made them a promise I'd bring them home, you know, and then to be taken away from that platoon up to another platoon, I felt a bit guilty because I'd promised. But then luckily the platoon commanders went down, were also good platoon commanders. They were very lucky, and none of those guys were lost.
How did you find, just still trying not to move too far ahead, but how did you find the national servicemen in 2 Platoon?
Excellent. I mean, I just couldn't speak highly enough of them. You know, I mean, here are young kids, and that's what they were, although they were older than me. I mean, some of them were deferred, they were uni students, they might have been 22 or 23, but here are young people plucked out of their environment and put into a totally strange environment, e.g. the military. But then next minute, you know, 3 months, 4 months later, or 5 months later, they're fighting on active service. I mean, I just wonder how some of them coped. And we were the first National Service Battalion, 5 Battalion, and I reckon we were a fantastic battalion. And I'm just still amazed how the National Servicemen actually assimilated in with the rest of us. And in fact, some of the National Servicemen were a lot smarter than some of the regs, you know. Some of the regs were more cunning, but they weren't more intelligent. So there's this wonderful mix of street smarts from some of the regs and, if you like, intelligence from the National Servicemen. And I can't speak highly enough of them. I think they just did an outstanding job.
That's a huge responsibility to put on your shoulders, meeting the parents and promising to send their sons home.
Yeah, no, it was. They invited me home to a party in Ermington in Sydney, and a big party. And I mean, here's the parents coming up to me, look after my Billy and look after Jeff, and you know, and what can I say? And I said, I'll do everything possible to ensure I bring these blokes home. That's what I said. So it did put a lot of responsibility on me, but also I wanted them to feel good. You know, I mean, it wasn't just a one-liner, I'm going to get rid of these people. I wanted them also to feel that I wasn't just a platoon commander, I was kill happy. I was a platoon commander that cared about my soldiers. I was there to do a job, but I would never risk one of my soldiers for 100 of theirs. Never. And I've always said that quite openly in company. I've said it to my senior officers. I would not risk one of mine for 100 of theirs, because it's just not worth it.
Well, after hardihood, Nui Dat was established. Did you play any part in the establishment of Nui Dat?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I mean, we all did. I mean, it was an incredible time. I mean, that battalion, and same with 6th Battalion when they first went up there, the same thing. You know, we had to actually dig our holes, we had to establish our shower blocks, our toilet blocks, our sleeping tents, etc., and at the same time do operations and patrol. I mean, it was full on, absolutely full on, and I'd say that sort of establishment of Nui Dat physically was probably the hardest that I've experienced in a long time, because again, you're not sleeping much at night. We had the dreaded bin bar 10,000, which was supposed to be the bin bar regiment that was going to attack us and wipe us off the earth, and every night we're standing behind machine guns waiting for the bin bar 10,000 to attack. And you get an hour's sleep if you're lucky, or 2 hours sleep, and the next day you're up at stand 2, which is sort of first light, so that's when the bad guys attack. And then a quick breakfast, then you're back to digging holes and digging command posts, and then patrolling, doing your TAOR patrol, your tactical area patrols every day. So it was full on. I mean, that period of establishment of Nui Dat, in terms of 5 Battalion in particular, and then later on 6, must have been the toughest for all the battalions to get up there. I mean, the battalions later were living in steel huts. We were living in tents for the whole period. You know, later on they established beautiful king stand huts, and they had beautiful dining rooms and air conditioning and all sorts of things at Nui Dat. But we didn't have any of that. So I think our guys did it very, very hard. Did a top job.
And you said on top of that there were patrols. So once you'd actually cleared the area and started to establish the base, how many how threatened was it? Like how?
Oh, well, it was full on because we were getting all sorts of intelligence reports, and I mean, it really, for the enemy, I mean, they missed a golden opportunity. They should have taken us on when we were digging in, when we were just starting to get established, because we were green, we were still an unknown quantity. We had a national servicemen. We didn't have all of our defensive positions in place. We were still learning. They missed a golden opportunity. They should have attacked, and they could have. They had the numbers to attack at that time, where the whole involvement of Australia in Vietnam would have changed like that because of politics. I mean, had they hit us at the right time, it might have just changed the whole commitment to Vietnam by the Australian government.
That's a really interesting observation. I mean, you were there right at the beginning, and you could see the vulnerability.
Absolutely. I mean, you could just. I used to say to myself, if these blokes come tonight, we're not ready. We were not ready. I mean, we thought we were ready. I mean, a little bit of barbed wire is not going to stop them. And we didn't have all the heavy guns that the Americans had. I mean, we had one 50 cal machine gun in the whole company. That's all we had. We had nothing on our side. We just had M60s. We didn't have any proper overhead cover. So if they wanted to mortar us, it would have been devastating. I mean, it would have killed, hundreds of people. But for whatever reason, they held back. I think they were a little bit unsure of us. Didn't know how to. I mean, we're Ukdaloy. Ukdaloy means land down south. And we're big too, compared to them. We're fairly big. And they didn't know what to make of us, I don't think, initially. But had they really put some pressure on and said, right, let's take these fellows out, I think it would have just changed the whole Vietnam issue. Because we're full of national servicemen, and just imagine, all of a sudden the battalion's hit and there's 40 or 50 killed. I mean, could you imagine what that would have created back here? So politically it would have been, as I say, it would have changed the whole situation. In my view, it would have changed everything.
But from the Viet Cong's perspective, from the VC perspective, Australia was quite a different enemy from them, from the US.
Oh, yes.
And in some extent became more feared.
Yep.
At what point do you think that shift started to change? Oh,
look, I think they tried us on a couple of times. I mean, the Battle of Long Tan, which has now gone into the annals of military history. I mean, 6 RAR, D Company 6 RAR. I mean, they took on the whole 2 regiments. There was something like 2,500 people against 100, or not even 100. I think there was 80 of them. And an extraordinary feat, absolutely extraordinary. And Harry Smith was a company commander, and I thought they just did a fantastic job. And my platoon, we went out the next day to ostensibly follow up the bad guys, and to see the devastation and the way that battle had been fought. I think they realised, hey, these Australians know how to handle themselves, and then of course SAS was doing a terrific job out there as well. They were hitting them in their own area, places where they felt secure, and that's why SAS got the nickname Phantoms of the Jungle, and that's why there was a bounty on SAS as well, a big dollar bounty on SAS, if anybody that got an SAS trooper, and they just didn't feel secure. And we operate totally differently to Americans. I mean, I've done patrols with Americans. I mean, the Americans I've patrolled with go down the main road. They go down the main track. They don't scrub bash like us. We actually work our way through the jungle. We do not use tracks at all. We might be parallel to a track for a while, but we're probably 20, 30 metres off it, because if you're too close to it, you can still get ambushed. So we used to use it purely as an axis of advance, but we'd be well off the track. And we go cross-country. And also at times we move at night. You see, and the Americans don't move at night. Well, they didn't in those days. And sometimes we move at night as well. So I think we unnerved them a bit, because our tactics were a little bit different to what they'd gotten used to with the Americans. The Americans were, in my view, the Americans have more guts than brains. I mean, they've got an incredible courage, and they're very nationalistic and won't shirk the issue. But in terms of their jungle warfare and their tactics, sadly lacking. They're still fighting a civil war in terms of some of the tactics they use at that time. Now it's probably different. But yeah, I think they sort of realised that we really were not just from a different country, but we're also a different enemy. And so they treated us with a bit more respect.
That moving at night was virtually mimicking their behaviour as well.
Yes, absolutely.
When did you know it was okay to move at night?
Mostly we try and move when there was a bit of moonlight. I mean, so you could actually see, but not too well, because if you can see, they can see. And also, we did a lot of cordon searches, which was a tactic that our battalion commander had devised, and our IO. Lots of the battalions felt that you could do more damage by taking people on and shooting them, and hopefully, you know, getting 4 or 5 or a dozen VC. We got more by hardly firing a shot. What they'd send me out to do is do a reconnaissance of a village, and then what we would do at night, we would put in a cordon around the village, a physical cordon, and then one of the companies would drive through at first light, and then you'd see all the VC running out. You know, they've been in at night catching up with their loved ones, and they'd be taking off the back way, next minute, boom. And we got so many VC that way, and we got so much information, and also we really got to know the friendlies and the unfriendlies in particular villages that we did these. And cordon search became a doctrine of the Australian Army in Vietnam, and our battalion started that. So because it was all done at night, we had to move a lot at night. It was quite funny. I mean, some of the things that happened to them, it was really quite amazing, because we used to tie ourselves together with toggle ropes, and you know, people stumbling around following one another, and you know, the old thing, if somebody at the front's going too fast, you know, the guy at the back's running, you know, it's just incredible. But you know, we managed to get into position, but we've lost a few people down wells at night, and lucky they weren't killed, you know. And people sort of stepping into, you know, shit pits, you know, like toilets and all that sort of stuff, and I know, I mean, it was hilarious at the time. It could have been scary. It was hilarious at the time, but very, very effective. And once we got confidence of moving at night, it didn't become a big deal. The first one I did, I thought, holy hell, this is crazy. I mean, you know, moving around at night. But once we got good at it, and we put little luminous things on the back of our packs so you could always see where the person was in front of you. And again, communications was absolutely vital. And, you know, we convinced the fellow at the front that he should move a lot slower, because if that person at the front is just moving very slow, it means a guy at the back might be trotting instead of galloping, you know, sort of we slowed the whole advance down. And we got very confident with that. And the enemy were never expecting that, because they don't move. They move at night because they're used to it, and also there's no air cover. That gives me at night, and also the way they navigate, they just follow tracks and move down tracks at night. So for them, it's sort of par for the course. But they never expected us to do it, and we did it a lot in the first, say, 6 months in country to do these cordon and search exercises or operations.
Well, if I may skip ahead to Queenbian, which you did talk about extensively prior, but I just have some questions. I did actually want to ask, when the firepower came in,
yep.
How long was it shooting for?
Well, the machine gun from A Company down the bottom would have been going for, no more than 2 or 3 minutes. It's a long time, 2 or 3 minutes of continual fire, and especially when it's sort of cracking around the top of your head. The helicopter gunships would have been there for a good 20 minutes. Yeah, good 20 minutes, I'd reckon. You know, getting the line right and flying in and firing one rocket and then veering off. And, you know, they didn't all let it all go at one time, because they were wanting these guys to lift their heads up so they could get a good shot, or see some of them scamper away, etc. So it was there for about a good 15, 20 minutes, I reckon, helicopters.
And how close were you to that?
I would say not far. I'd say from 20 feet, 20 feet away, maybe 25 feet maximum, but well down so that the shrapnel wouldn't come back and hit us.
I was going to ask about the shrapnel and protection from that.
Because it was on rock as well, and of course you get those ricochets, but you know, we were very lucky, nobody got wounded by our own fire.
And when you discovered the tunnel system, was this the first time you'd actually been able to get inside one of the tunnels?
No, we'd found a few tunnels on Hardyhood where, you know, we'd go down and have a bit of a look, and that's quite scary. But thankfully, we had engineers that used to travel with company headquarters, and they were what we call the tunnel rats, and they used to go down and check those things out. They were trained to do it. We weren't trained to go down. But I've been in a couple, and I don't particularly like it. It's unnatural, and you just go down with a pistol. You never know what you're going to find, you know. Whereas our engineers, our sappers, used to do it all the time, and I just admire them. And you know, occasionally you'd find somebody cowering down there, hiding down there, and you get them up. And sometimes you find guns and ammunition that was stowed down there, or some food items, etc. So tunnels and clearing tunnels was a very, very big part of the Vietnam War, because that's the only way they could basically either hide themselves or also hide their equipment.
And specifically talking about Queenbian, how big was the
very
space
tiny. Yeah, I mean, I went into one of them, and I mean, I'm a pretty big bloke, and I struggled. I mean, I really struggled to sort of get through, but I was determined to go down and have a look. I felt I owed that to Normie Wommel, that I really had to have a look to see why he died, you know. And I got down into some of these. Now, once you got inside the major rooms, they were huge. Well, they had an operating theatre down there. A hospital, you know, which was sort of 6 foot ceiling, because most of them are only 5 foot tall, so 6 foot ceiling, and generators and lights and hospital beds and oxygen bottles, all sorts of things. Just amazing. A kitchen, they had a viaduct, they had fresh water running through. It was a very, by Viet Cong standards, it was the Nui Dat Hilton, basically, in terms of quality accommodation. It really was 5-star Viet Cong accommodation. And you get down into it, and, you know, I mean, you put your hand into something which is, you know, unsavoury. But meanwhile, the engineers have already been through, they've cleared it of booby traps and all that sort of business. And a lot of the engineer tunnel rats were little guys. They weren't big guys. And they weren't big guys like me. They were sort of tiny and slim. And they could move around in those tunnels very, very quickly. And also they knew what they were doing, and we didn't really know what we were doing. We really didn't even know what we were looking for. It was more a curiosity factor quite often to go down into a tunnel. But it's not my favourite pastime. Don't like it. Yet, you know, I've been in submarines and I've been in confined spaces, but to be down in a tunnel, I feel rather helpless, and I don't like feeling helpless, because there's not much you can do with a pistol. Except shoot yourself, maybe.
And then that was quite an intelligence coup.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Oh, no, I mean, for our battalion, it was one of the intelligence coups of our tour of duty. And it wasn't just my platoon. I mean, it was a team effort, and it was battalion headquarters. All right, my platoon, we got ambushed and we had to extract ourselves out of it. The next day, John McAloney with the Salt Pioneers went down and found a bit more, and then we got the engineers in, and then we got A Company up to do a bit more. So no, it was a team effort as far as the battalion was concerned. But I guess from our part, I guess we found the tunnels, but it was then a team effort to clear the tunnels and find all of the other bits and pieces that were in it.
Well, you awarded the Military Cross for that. How did you feel about winning the cross?
Well, I had no idea, absolutely no idea. I mean, I was assistant adjutant in SAS by this stage, because I came back and went straight to SAS, and my CO, Colonel Isles, good bloke, got me into his office one day and said, "Mike, we've got a top secret message," because I used to pick up top secret messages all the time. We've got a top secret message in at headquarters we want you to pick up, which was headquarters Western Command. And I went in there, and there's a chap there. His title is military secretary. He was ostensibly the person, civil servant, not army, but a public servant who's responsible for officer postings and all that sort of stuff. And I went in and he handed me this envelope and he had a bit of a smile on his face. And normally if I had to go in and pick up a top secret signal, it meant that we had one of our squadrons in Vietnam and had a contact and maybe somebody killed or wounded, because I was also the family liaison officer that would have to go out with the priest and advise them that their husband had been killed or something like that. So I had no idea. I then came back and I handed the signal to the colonel. And by this stage, you got the adjutant to come in as well, Vin Murphy. And he said, "Well, Mick," he said, he stood up and he shook me by the hand. And he said, "Mick, congratulations, you've just been awarded the Military Cross." I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. And, from my perspective, it was a platoon effort. I mean, I just happened to be the platoon commander. You can't do these things on your own. But I thought, I thought maybe there might be something, but it wasn't expected, and certainly had nothing come out of it, I wouldn't have been disappointed, because lots of other platoon commanders and section commanders in the battalion and soldiers had done things far more memorable than me, but that's the way it works. My stretcher bearer, Peter Fraser, got a military medal. He should have got a Victoria Cross, actually, by crawling out on that flat rock. But he got a military medal. We're still mates. He lives in Western Australia. My Normie Wommel, who died unfortunately, he posthumously won a MID. Had he lived, he would have won a military medal as well, but he won a MID. So it's just one of those things, you don't expect these things, but when they happen, you grab them, but you grab them with both hands on behalf of a lot of other people.
That contact that you had in the operation is really, it's big in so many different aspects, on a personal level and a professional level. Losing Wommel, I mean, how did you pick yourself up and
I found it very hard. It's sad, really. I mean, and I think this is part of our problem with Vietnam soldiers. Again, it's this mental conditioning that you go through before you go, and also after a period of time in country. You tend to detach yourself from reality. You tend to detach yourself from pain. You tend to detach yourself from something which upsets you. So I basically just brought down the shutters, and that is a big problem with Vietnam veterans in terms of emotions and all those sort of things. The shutters just roll down. It's a condition that we condition ourselves to. I mean, a classic example is that part of the problem with Vietnam veterans have never been able to mourn their dead. I mean, I could never mourn Normie Wommel's death. I mean, he was put in a body bag, put in an aircraft and flown out and back to Australia. He's now buried up in Queensland. I mean, every other war, you've had an opportunity to actually mourn your dead. You can have a bit of a cry, or you can say a few prayers, or, you know what I mean? But Vietnam veterans didn't have that, I won't say luxury, but they didn't have that opportunity. And so therefore, what you tend to do, you tend to mentally condition yourself, where you just divorce yourself from anything that's nasty. You just push it to one side. And that's what I did with Norm. I said to myself, I'm the platoon commander, I'm responsible, I've got to get on and do the job. I don't care how bad all the others feel, we've got to lift ourselves out of this and keep going. And that's exactly what we did.
Mick, you did tell us earlier on in the day the story about Wommel, but I understand that you had to give Private Fraser an order that he ignored. Mm-hmm. What did you say to him?
I said, "Don't go, Peter, don't go." It wasn't sort of an order like, you will not go. I just said, "Peter, don't go, it's not safe, it's don't go," but he chose to go. And once he had decided to do that, I mean, there's not a lot I could do except to give him more support, I just didn't want two people stuck out there shot, And at that time too, I didn't realise how seriously Norm had been wounded. All I know is that we just simply couldn't risk any more getting up there. And when I said to him something like, "Pete, don't go," I mean, he went. So he didn't listen to me.
And what did he do? I understand he put himself in a very dangerous position.
He actually crawled up and put his body between the enemy and Norm Wommel. to shield his body from further gunfire. I mean, that goes beyond the call of courage.
And from where you were positioned, could you see him?
I could then, yes, my word. Because I then moved up to a higher ground so that I could basically, if necessary, shoot down and see the enemy from the higher ground. Then I went back down, and then we had to move Norm off the rock with the poncho, with the platoon sergeant, Skinny Calvert, Peter Fraser, myself and somebody else, I can't remember who, perhaps might have been my SIG, to try and get Norm out of harm's way, but by that stage we knew that he was struggling.
So, how did you go about calling the chopper? Like, can you just take us through
Sure.
how you bring in a chopper in
Yep.
a situation like that?
Yep. At that time, being sort of in a classic platoon environment, not a reconnaissance platoon environment, I had to work through my company headquarters, which was Support Company. And of course, Support Company was right near Battalion headquarters. So basically, I just requested a gunfire support, and I got it fairly quickly. Then Battalion headquarters requested from the American liaison officer, and next minute the choppers are in the air. And then once the choppers are in the air, I talk to them direct. You know, I can say stop or go or all that sort of business, because you can't do that through two other intermediaries. In case something goes wrong, by the time the message gets there, it's too late. So you then direct fire yourself. They come onto my frequency. I don't go onto their frequency, they come onto mine, because they've got much more flexibility in a chopper. And then you just direct the fire. You know, you throw smoke, and he says, I see green smoke, and you say affirmative, and then enemy position 20 feet east of green smoke, and that's, boom, where they come in and hopefully hit the target.
Because you were in a still volatile and quite small position.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we were all, I mean, our whole platoon was still in a very, very precarious situation, including our doctor and including, I think, the company sergeant major, who was a little bit further down the track, and also some of the SIG platoon were also with their radios not far away. So, I mean, my platoon in particular, because we were right at the contact point, but also the advance of the battalion headquarter group too was in a pretty tricky position as well. So it was scary. It was scary because of the closeness of the enemy, and then of course also the closeness of the rocket fire that was coming in as well.
So did you, how far away from your original position did you have to move, Womel, to bring the chopper in?
Oh, well, the actual chopper to get Normie Womel out was a rock ledge behind me. The contact position was at the front of me, and the rock ledge was behind me. So again, the chopper pilot took an enormous risk coming in. I mean, the chopper blades were nearly hitting the cliff face because of the angle. I mean, the chopper blades don't move this way. I mean, they are vertical takeoff, and here is this chopper coming in, and there was a sort of a rock ledge here. The chopper pilot had to sort of move his aircraft in such a way that his chopper blade wouldn't hit the side of the mountain, so we could get Normie Womel onto the stretcher and to hospital. But by this stage, he'd passed away, but I didn't know that.
So the chopper didn't land; it just hovers.
Hovered with full power still going, and then some of my boys actually laid Norm onto the stretcher, and then the chopper took off.
It's an incredibly dangerous operation. Not even considering that you're under fire at the time, but just physically the geography of the spot that you were in.
Exactly. I mean, Nui Dat, that whole mountain range, we used to call it the Warburtons, because we hated that place. You know, what's that song? Don't go to the Warburtons. Please don't go to the Warburton Mountains. It's a song that was going around at that time. And we hated the place. I mean, it really, we'd had a lot of contacts there. The whole battalion had a lot of contacts there. It was a natural defensive and observation post for the enemy. Natural. It was so high up you could see for miles all the way around, and the place was full of them. And every time we went there was some sort of a contact. C Company had a bad contact there. A Company, D Company. Everybody had contacts there, so it was just lousy with either VC or NVA, and it was a very difficult place to fight a war because the gradient's about 1 in 2, and it's all rock slides and big rocks, and not a lot of quick places to sort of get to. I mean, you just can't duck for cover. You've got to actually climb and get into cover. So it's a very laborious, slow way of fighting a war, and that's why, I mean, I've been over the Kokoda Trail now since, and in a peacetime environment, I might say, and I just admire the guys that fought in the Kokoda Trail because that was very similar, very narrow ridge and straight up, and the Nui Dat, I mean, they weren't as long as the Kokoda Trail, but certainly in that short, if you like, 200 or 300 metres where we had this particular contact, it was every bit as bad as the Kokoda Trail. So it was a nasty bit of real estate, and we all hated it, actually. Every time we said we're going back up, oh no, not again, you know, because it brings back the memories of where certain things happened.
So on this day, how were you communicating to everybody? Shouting,
on the top of my voice. I mean, I've got a very loud voice, and I was using my best parade ground voice to communicate with all my soldiers, and that's when the bad guys realised who the commander was. So every time I shouted an order, there'd be a shot coming my way or a burst of fire. So what I'd do, I'd yell something out and then move very quickly because next minute there's a burst of fire going. And the next day I went down, after John McElhaney's platoon had gone down, I went down to have a look at where we had our contact. And there was a tree that I was behind for a period of time that was just shot to bits. I mean, about this far up, it was all splintered and shot to bits where obviously they must have known I was there and they just kept shooting at it. And they couldn't get a decent, I don't think they could get a decent shot at me because of some rocks that were in front of it. So I was down fairly low. But every time I yelled an order, they shot where my voice was. So I had to sort of continually move around. And I might add, it wasn't just my tree that was shot to bits. A lot of the other guys' trees were shot to bits as well. So we're still, you know, we'll never know, I mean, how many were there. You know, we just won't. It seemed like a hell of a lot more than 3.
And was it a surprise to you when you saw that the next day?
Oh, yes, yeah, totally. Because at the time, I mean, your adrenaline is rushing so fast, and your mind is just going through 100 things. And interestingly, in all the contacts that I've had, and you know, probably had over 20 contacts, you get a bitter taste in your mouth, a very bitter taste in your mouth, and I think that's the adrenaline in your body. It's almost a sort of a dry, bitter taste. Fear, survival, adrenaline, something rushing through your blood. And I noticed that with almost every contact that I had, I got this dry, bitter taste in my mouth, which now doctors have told me it's the adrenaline. Interesting, isn't it?
And when you remember that taste now, can you liken it to anything? Like what do you think it tasted like?
Not the only thing I can liken it to is in boxing, if someone really, you know, hangs a decent punch on you, you get that same bitter taste. You know, it's on the side of them. Again, it's the adrenaline. I think. I mean, you're out there, and you're in defensive mode or you're in attack mode, and somebody, you know, gets one in. Again, you get that bitter taste. The same in rugby. I mean, you know, if I've had a real bad head knock, again, I get that bitter taste in my mouth, and I just think it's just the adrenaline. You're just running on very, very high adrenaline levels, and they must come out through, you know, your taste buds or something.
Is it sort of metallic or acidic?
Metallic, yeah, not acidic, metallic. Really an off taste, which is interesting, you know, now in retrospect. At the time I didn't know what it was. I thought it was just fear. Yeah, you think, and drinking water, I mean, you know, drinking water, and then after a contact, although I wasn't smoking, I'd always have a cigarette. Yeah, just psychologically used to calm me. Just a psychological thing. And but it was the dry, if you like, metallic taste in my mouth that really let me know that I'd been in some sort of a contact.
Well, you would have been on high adrenaline during that particular contact.
Yeah, it was full on. But the interesting thing again, I mean, you know, when you sort of look back, is that everything seemed to be going in slow motion. You know, it was like slow motion. Yet the 3¼ hours that we're in contact with the enemy, or 3½ hours, I think, seemed to go so quickly. I mean, yet at the time that you're actually doing all this, you're sort of saying to yourself, my God, will it ever finish? You know, it's going on and on and on. But then when it's over, you know, you think, God. But whilst things are happening, it's almost like if you've ever been in a car accident or a rollover, everything happens in slow motion. You can it's like a movie, like a replay type thing. And I found with a lot of contacts, things to me were going in slow motion, not in fast for some reason. And it was almost as if my thought processes or my brain or whatever was processing differently to the real situation. Or again, whether it was a condition that I put myself into to be not panicking and to be a little bit more cool, and not cool, but certainly more calculating in a situation. So it was, I found that although some contacts might only take 5 seconds, you know, a quick burst of fire, at the time it seems like 5 minutes. But then when it's over, you realise how quick it was. So it's just a condition, I think, a mental condition you get into.
It is very interesting to hear you talk about it, and many have written about what has been termed the fog of war. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're describing when things are really in slow motion?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't know they called it the fog of war, but to me it was almost like a replay. You know, you can, even today, I mean, I can some things I've forgotten, obviously, but some things I can still remember quite vividly, and they still almost play in slow motion in my mind as to what occurred. Whether that's a select piece of memory that I've stored and it's in slow replay, or whether it's just what's been stored at the time, you know. But I really think it's a condition. I think it's a condition that we get into in those sort of stressful situations where things just travel very slowly. Yet they're happening around you very quickly. But, you know, you think, oh, gee, you know. And even a bad guy lifting his weapon, I mean, he'd probably seriously lift his weapon like that, you know. But at the time, it's almost like he's doing it slowly. Interesting. And then what you've got to do is do it faster.
And so the intelligence that you found, you've mentioned, you've detailed quite a bit about the intelligence, and there was a diary.
Yeah, diary. Yeah, the commander's diary, and that was just a valuable piece of intelligence, because what it had basically noted was the movements of that regiment for a period of a couple of years. So what it established our intelligence to do, and higher authority, I assume, like task force and the Americans, to establish a movement pattern and a course of business, so to speak, as to how these people move and how far they move and where their resupply is and their codes and their contacts in certain villages, etc. So yeah, no, it enabled us to launch some very, very successful operations after that.
So what did come after Queenbian?
Oh, look, we did patrols, and after Queenbian, that's when I went to Saigon for the 2 or 3 nights, and Dennis Rayner and I had a great time in Saigon. We did march with the Vietnamese, but the rest of the time we were just gallivanting around the place, you know, doing what the journalists do. The journalists were sitting up there at the top of the Caravel Hotel, looking over War Zone D, watching the artillery and napalm, and they were writing their notes about the war, some of the war journalists. And Dennis and I were up there, and we were just saying, God, what a way to fight a war. Just amazing. And then the rest of the time, we go to some bar girls and have fun.
Well, after Queenbian, you were telling us earlier in the day that you then went on to, or it was as a result of the Queenbian action and contact, that you then formed the Recon patrol. So can you just detail it for us a bit more about how things changed for you and what the brief was for this new patrol?
Yeah, a new platoon.
Platoon, sorry.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, it's to do with immediate reconnaissance for the battalion. We were to fill the gap between SAS and the battalion. We were to work off SAS intelligence, but not go out as far as them. They used to go out 30,000, 40,000 kilometres. We used to go out about 10, maximum 15, actually, kilometres. And I guess where it changed things for me was that I had a totally different responsibility. I mean, I almost became a total independent commander with this platoon, because in my platoon I had 4 patrols, and each patrol had a radio, including mine. Each patrol was a four-man patrol, so there's 16. Myself, I had 5 because we had 2 radios, so there were 21. I mean, 21 used to go out on a regular basis. And, we'd always have a couple of guys on R&R in Bangkok somewhere, and maybe, and we'd always have to leave 1 or 2 behind because of defence. And there was always somebody that's crook or not quite right, So we'd operate with about 20 in the field at all times. And because I had the 2 radios and I was in charge of these 4 patrols, I almost became like a mini company commander, really. And also, I had direct access to all of my fire support at the back, so that if I wanted artillery or a gunship or anything else, I just went straight to battalion headquarters. I didn't have to go through my company or anybody else. And then if we needed some support from elsewhere, like I've also called in naval gunfire, if I needed support from elsewhere, they would just put me direct in touch with the Americans, where I could actually talk to the Americans. So I had enormous resources available to me, and I think that sort of made me realise that if I had these resources, I could fight this war another way rather than the classic way. And that's why I used to use a lot of firepower, bugger the dollars, just go for the bangs, And I'd use artillery, I'd use mortars, I'd use American artillery, I'd use fighter aircraft, I'd use Puff the Magic Dragon, which was a DC-3 full of Gatling guns out the side. And in one contact I used naval gunfire. So, what it did for me as a young platoon commander, it gave me an enormous amount of experience, and it also gave me an enormous amount of satisfaction knowing that I could handle all this in a contact situation, which a lot of platoon commanders never had the opportunity to do, because they still have to work within this is not a criticism, they have to work within a company structure. But me being out on my own, a lot of the time, it just gave me total independence, and I really liked that independence. A bit of that loner thing coming out again, where I don't have to report to anybody, I just do my own thing.
But who would you be answerable to?
I was directly answerable to the ops officer, the operations officer, who was also my company commander, Max Carroll, and then straight to the CO. That was my chain of command, to the operations officer and to the commanding officer.
So how often would you have briefing meetings with...
Every time I went out on a patrol or an exercise, I'd have a meeting with the ops officer or the intelligence officer or the assistant intelligence officer. And then when I came back, I'd always have a debrief. I'd always be debriefed when I came back off patrol. And our CO, again, going back to the late, he's passed away now, unfortunately, John War, that doesn't matter where I came in through the wire, there's this huge position which is surrounded by barbed wire, and no matter where I used to come back in, he would be there. It's uncanny, where he would know exactly where we were coming in. And yet I hadn't told anybody where I was coming in, but he would be there with a big grin. "G'day Mick, how's it going? How's the boys?" You know, he'd check us all in. He knew all of my diggers by name, you know, and he'd smile and yeah, he was he's a terrific commanding officer, just a wonderful commanding officer.
So you've got 4-man patrols.
Mm-hmm.
And how many would go out at once? About 4?
All the patrols would be out. I mean, if we were doing what we call a screening exercise for the battalion, we'd have 4 patrols out. There'd be perhaps 2 to my left and me here, and another one to my right. So we're advancing in a straight line, acting as a screen. Or if there was some high ground, I might say, look, it's a bit scary up there. We'll work as 2-man patrols. As 2 patrols. So there'd be 8 and 9 or 10 and 10 in each patrol going up on the high ground. If I was really worried about the enemy situation, I would go what they call reconnaissance in strength. I'd work as a platoon of 20. And a couple of times I'm glad that I did, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. So you tend to read the situation, and also who you're working with, the company that you're working with. By that I mean the company commander that you're working with, because a lot of the time you say, "Well, sir, you know, what would you want me to do? How do you want me to handle this?" And he might say, "Well, look, Mick, it's up to you," you know. And then I'd say, "Well, look, I'm thinking of doing this, and this," and he'd say, "Fine, you know, no worries, do it." That was it.
So you would work with ABCD companies and
Yes.
go in advance of them?
Yes, quite often. Mostly, actually. Mostly. They would use us as a 4th platoon, because there were 3 platoons in the company. They'd use us as a 4th platoon, but with an entirely different role. For instance, if one of the companies had to build the minefield down on the Horseshoe, which is just a disgrace, that exercise, they would put us out in small patrols as listening posts. To make sure that we're well out away from enemy mortar range. So whilst our people are working, that the enemy can't mortar. And then at night, I would operate as an ambush platoon, because these guys have been working all day, knocking stakes in the ground and putting up barbed wire and ostensibly buggered. They'd have to get a good night's sleep to work the next day. Well, you know, we'd been sort of just out there, you know, not resting, but listening, but not really working hard physically, just mentally. And then at night I'd concentrate them into a platoon, and then we'd actually go and ambush as a platoon.
So because you've got different configurations that you're working with, did you have particular men that you would go out with, or did you position? I'm wondering how you would position yourself.
All of the patrols were constant. In other words, we had patrol commanders, and my patrol was the command patrol, and I had my platoon sergeant with me. So if anything happened to me, my sergeant immediately took over those other patrols. And we had 2 radios, so we had 2 radio operators with me, and one who was a forward scout or a tail end Charlie, because I used to go up forward quite a bit.
So yeah, you're working next to your sergeant, or
Mm-hmm.
with your sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
So you've just mentioned that you preferred to go up front.
Well, it depends. I mean, I'd either go up front, or my sergeant would go up front, or one of my diggers, my batman, would go up front. Depends very much on, you know, how we were feeling and what the role was. But you try and rotate, because you can't have one person up front all the time. It's just too draining. Because that forward scout role is quite a critical role.
But you, as commander, you didn't necessarily have to put yourself out the front.
No, but you've got to share the workload. You've got to share the workload. And I thought I was pretty good. I thought I was pretty good out there in terms of, remember, the 6th sense and the smells and stuff. So, yeah, no, I did my share. I did my share up there.
And what was the advantage of working in very small numbers?
Stealth and speed. Once you'd found something, you could concentrate. I could concentrate my guys very quickly and get out. And a small group can move quieter and less noticeable than a big group. And also, a small group can actually go to ground and just stay and listen and observe. And it's amazing when you go to ground and just listen and observe what you pick up in the jungle in terms of movement of the enemy. And with a company, you can't do that. I mean, a company is nearly 100 strong. In fact, it's 112, you know. You just can't do that. A platoon is 30. A platoon is more manageable than a company on reconnaissance. But small groups of 4 and 5 of reconnaissance is the way to go, definitely. And that's the SAS tactics. I mean, SAS works the same way, and we just adopted their methods.
And did that bring you even closer as a group?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the patrol commanders today, I mean, you know, we now have a reunion every 2 years. We had our first reunion, because I was overseas for 15 years. We had our first reunion, it would have been about 6 years ago. And it was fantastic, you know, and it's interesting. I got them all put up at the Travelodge Hotel here in Adelaide. And I went in to have a beer with them, you know, in the bar, and I walked past the bar area and I thought, they're too old. Not my blokes. You know, you've got this mind's eye, you know, I thought, no, they're too old. And then slowly you walk in, and it's almost as if you're in a time warp. All of a sudden, these faces become younger. Those old faces become younger. It's like, g'day Terry, g'day Bruce, g'day Peter, you know. It's very interesting. Now, I've organised the reunions here, and we've now had 3, and we're going to have our 4th in, 2 actually. We're having our 3rd in Canberra next year.
Well, I understand that on one occasion you were asked to go out. There was some intelligence about a US spotter plane.
Yes. So
can you tell us, leading up to that, how did that
Well,
come
I
about?
mean, it originally happened on Hardyhood. On Hardyhood, there was a notice that came down to all of us that a spotted plane was missing. And it's what they call a FAC aircraft, FAC, Forward Air Controller aircraft. And they're little prop jobs, they're Cessnas, pilot and co-pilot, with some rocket pods under the wings that they use to spot targets, and then the jets come in. And anyway, we didn't find anything, but I went out on this operation with A Company on the rear of Nui Dat, mountain of Nui Dat. And we're operating well ahead of A Company, but as a platoon, because that was also a bad area. And Bob Carney was up front with his patrol, and all of a sudden a signal comes back, wheel, you know, like this, and then wheel, you know. And by the time the message came back to me through 4 or 5 people, wheel? What do you mean, wheel? You know, like this, and the message would go up, and then it'd come back, wing, you know. Wheel, wing, plane. Okay, I mean, like this, go to ground. And I went forward to Bob, and there was a wreckage of this aircraft. So I deployed the platoon around it, and we then went and inspected the aircraft, or the remains of the aircraft, and found two bodies, actually, but they'd been there for 6 months, so they were in a fairly poor state. And the pilot was killed on impact. The co-pilot had a fractured femur, and he'd actually managed to crawl out of the aircraft and put up a last stand, because all around his body there was just empty spent shells around him, and there was a bullet hole in the back of his head, so he'd been executed, or he'd been shot from behind. And you can only put these things together because once we then had a look all the way around, we saw fighting pits. And what we discovered through our intelligence was that there was 274 Regiment had ambushed that plane when it went down on Hardyhood, had dug themselves in, and they were waiting for somebody to come and find the aircraft to ambush them. So how lucky were whoever it would have been not finding that aircraft, because all around were weapons pits all the way around this aircraft. Anyway, I called up A Company. A Company came forward, Max Carroll at that time, and we got a chopper in with SAS guys to remove the bodies, and the bodies were put into a kit bag and taken out. And then 4 years ago, and I'd always wondered what happened to the next of kin of those pilots, because they were missing for 6 months. And I, through Bob Carney and myself, we got onto the old military network to try and find the next of kin, because the book had been written, Crossfire had been written. And lo and behold, we found the son of the pilot in San Antonio, Texas. And Denise and I, Denise is American, Denise and I had to fly to Dallas anyway for business. So I got in contact with the son on the email, and he came up and had dinner with us in Dallas, and I presented him with a book, and his wife, who was an ex-Air Force officer, he was an ex-Air Force officer, and 2 little kids were there as well. And when he left, he hugged me and said, "Thanks, you've changed my life." And of course, I've got a tear in my eye, you know. I said, "Why?" And he said, that if you'd not found my father, my life would not have been the same, because my mother would not have remarried. You know, when someone's missing in action, I mean, you really don't know as a wife and a mother, you know, and she was a good woman. She just wouldn't have remarried. And as it was, once the bodies were discovered and then brought home and buried, she then, 2 years later, actually married his flying instructor, who ended up being a general in the American Air Force. He was the Air Force commander in charge of air cover during Desert Storm, the first one. So, it was interesting. I mean, and then I just wrote a letter to all my diggers saying that, I'd managed to. And lo and behold, out of the blue, I get a letter from this guy, Jacobs. He sends me a photograph of his father, and with all of his father's medals, because he had a bronze star and a silver star and purple hearts and God knows what else. And that I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to present it to our regimental museum in Darwin, because our battalion's now in Darwin, and just put it up there as a bit of a memento of the Vietnam War. But it was a bit of closure, I think, for all of us. We never found the co-pilot. And the co-pilot should have won a Medal of Honour. I mean, he fought to a standstill. He had a fractured femur, and he just fought to a standstill. He didn't know that his pilot was dead, you know. But we could never find his next of kin. He was single, I knew that. But now his parents would be dead now, because he'd be 65 or something. And we don't know whether he had brothers or sisters, but at least the pilot, we managed to get some closure.
Michael, I do want to talk to you about east of the Horseshoe, but before, I've got this general question about POWs. Mm-hmm. When you were out on patrol, mm-hmm. and did you take POWs?
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, not on patrol, no. Most of the POWs that I was involved in were very much part of cordon and search. Out in the bush, no, you just didn't take POWs, and I won't elaborate any further.
Well, anticipating the answer to that, but what did you do with the dead?
If we had time, we'd bury them, if we had time. If we didn't have time, we'd just leave them and just, again, shoot and scoot, take off, because as soon as you've got into a contact, I mean, you've basically breached your own security. You've got to get out of there, because you just don't know what else is in the area. But, we try to bury the dead. Yeah, I mean, that's what we did.
That was a general question, but
yep. Now
I'd like to start talking about east of the Horseshoe. Mm-hmm. What was your brief for that? Yeah,
that was interesting. We wanted to establish a strong point out to the east of our location, Nui Dat, because the brigadier at the time, Brigadier Graham, had this notion of, or this philosophy of putting in a minefield, which ran from the Horseshoe all the way south to a village, kilometres, miles of minefield. And the Horseshoe was a very, very important strategic, if you like, point in terms of its high ground, good vision, good fields of vision, and you could cover part of the minefield from the Horseshoe, but not all. So we had to actually go in and fly into the Horseshoe with, I think from memory, we went in first, and then D Company came in after, But there was no bad guys up there, thank God. We just basically occupied the position. And then from there, basically we established, or we didn't because we then went out on patrol straight away, but D Company actually established a defensive position on the Horseshoe from which we could then operate. And artillery was there as well from which we could operate. Because where the fence was going in, it was too far away to be covered by fire from Nui Dat, so it had to be covered from a fire base on the Horseshoe.
And then you immediately went out on patrol?
Yeah, immediately out on patrol. And again, you know, we'd operate in small groups or half groups or as a platoon, depending very much on the circumstances and the likely enemy risk.
And how far out from where D Company was establishing base did you go before you came across your first contact?
Not far. I mean, you know, 5,000 metres. I mean, we had a contact, you know, but mostly sort of, I'd say we were sort of, you know, between 5,000 and 10,000 metres out. Again, the idea was to clear it of mortars, and some of the mortars they had, the larger mortars, they could sort of fire 5,000 or 6,000 metres. So we go a fair way out to try and deny them that access.
So, I mean, from my notes, this is one of the worst operations that you have. Why was that?
Well, one of the things that we learned at Portsea is that all obstacles must be covered by fire. And here is this massive minefield being put down, and you can't cover it by fire. I mean, by cover by fire, it means you can actually see the obstacle to cover it by fire. And what was happening, the enemy were coming in at night, lifting the mines and then laying them, and then the next day our diggers would step on the mine. And we lost 3 or 4 officers. We lost Bob Milligan, we lost an FO, we lost Major Bourne, the company commander, we lost young Chris Rinkin, a platoon commander, we lost soldiers, and they were our mines that the bad guys had lifted through the night and then brought back in and planted where they knew that we were going to operate to extend the fence. I thought it was a harebrained idea, a stupid idea, even at the time I was disgusted. I mean, I'm still disgusted with it because I thought, you know, here's something they teach you in officer cadet school as one of the principles of laying obstacles is to cover it by fire. And here is a guy that's ostensibly, you know, a very competent commander who orders this minefield to be laid. And I thought it was just an absolute harebrained idea, absolutely stupid. So what we used to do was to try and deny the enemy from coming and lifting more minefields. We would go out and ambush at night to stop them from coming in. And one night we were out there and we got into a fairly major firefight.
Can you describe the contact?
Yeah, no, we found a track and you could see with the Ho Chi Minh sandal marks that had a fair amount of use. And also we had some pretty good intelligence because there was a village south of the minefield which had been attacked several times. So I set an ambush, and again, when you're at Portsea and when you're in infantry training centre, they teach you to lay what we call linear ambushes. They're ambushes in a straight line where you've got a sentry on one end, a sentry in the other. You've got a rendezvous at the back, but they're in a straight line. I never used to do that. I used to set what's called a triangle ambush, where I'd have a straight line on the killing ground, but then I'd have my flanks protected, and I'd have one gun facing down that track, one gun facing down that track, and a gun behind. And in the front centre was my headquarter group. And thankfully I did that because it was about, I think we'd had dinner and then moved into the ambush position. And it was probably about 8:30 at night, 9 o'clock, something like that. You could hear guys jogging down the track and you could hear the pots and pans shaking, and I thought, well, hello, here they come. And we opened up. Bluey Twaits, one of my machine gunners, he opened up and he got a few, but then immediately they went to ground and retaliated and fired back, and one of the rounds had hit Bluey in the back of the leg, and of course he was wounded, and his gun jammed too, which didn't help. Bit of grass got caught in the belt, so he couldn't fight back. And then all of a sudden they started to deploy and then put in a counterattack, you know, and I thought, hello, we're in trouble here. So immediately I get on, I call in artillery. First thing I did, call in artillery. I mean, we're still fighting and shooting, but I thought, well, I want to get some arty on the ground. And we got in some artillery, but then they employed some hugging tactics. So what they do is that, you know, I had to call in the artillery and I dropped it. Because at this stage, when they did the flanking attack around on the side of us, it was only that I'd set a triangle ambush and I had Bob Searle, who was my other patrol commander, with a gun at the back, that we managed to break it up. Because as they came in on a flank, this gun just turned around and hit them with enfilade fire from the side and just knocked them over. So they then withdrew and then had another go at us. And meanwhile, we've got Bluey Twaits has got really bad bleeding. And I mean, his leg was amputated. I mean, that's how bad the wound was. And so my major concern once again was, I've got to get this guy out. You know, I've already lost one. I'm not going to lose another one. I've got to get this guy out. But at the same time, trying to extract myself from the bad guys. And they kept shooting and Tracer going left, right and centre. And anyway, I had a bad feeling about this. I just had a really bad feeling because, again, those guys were just too well organised. And they didn't cut and run. They actually attacked, counter-attacked. And I reckon there would have been 20 or 30 of them, you know, equal numbers. But what I didn't know, what was coming behind, you know, so they could have been a battalion strength. It could have been the whole of 274 Regiment. And an interesting thing was that it was, but not at that time. They were a little bit further behind. So the first thing was to try and stop the bleeding, and I couldn't stop the bleeding. My finger kept slipping off the pressure point on Blue's thigh. And Blue Mulvey, who was then my acting platoon sergeant, get out of the skip, get out, I'll get it. So he got it straight away. Boom, he was straight on. Stopped the bleeding, thankfully, and then we bandaged him up as best we could. But we're still under fire, and I thought, how the hell do we get out of here, you know? So there was a bit of a lull in the fighting, and you could hear some of their guys wounded, lying in the killing ground, but I wasn't about to go and check them. So I instructed very quietly for all of us to quietly withdraw, you know, just quietly withdraw without any noise or anything, because I just had a bad feeling. I just felt that, you know, this is not, something worse is going to happen here, and I want to get out of here. Again, it's this, the sixth sense, perhaps. So we slowly withdrew to an area, because I had to get Blue out too with a chopper as well. So we withdrew very quietly, and this was in a sort of like a clump of bamboo and everything. So we withdrew very quietly to a paddy field, and quietly went to ground in the paddy field, but still calling in artillery and an airstrike. And that's when I called in Navy guns as well. And all of a sudden, our own position where we had withdrawn from was being mortared by the bad guys. They actually mortared that position. And I thought, oh God, how lucky am I? You know, I mean, we just got out in the nick of time, because they had then managed to get their heavy weapon support up from the rear, because it was a regiment, because the next night they attacked a village south of us. So they then came up with their mortars and they hit exactly where we were, because the next day I saw that. And meanwhile, I've got to get a chopper in to get this guy out. And anyway, I got onto the dust-off, and it was American dust-off. And he was flying around up there, and all my guys are still going back like this. And we were, by this stage, far enough away to... we weren't out of small arms fire, but we were far enough away with our artillery going in to take their mind off us, if you know what I mean. But I had to get the chopper in, and it was a night extraction, which is very dangerous. So anyway, I'm talking to the pilot, and he's saying west or east, and anyway, he was confusing what I was saying, and there was still a bit of gunfire. And finally, I could see that the chopper was going to make the approach, and I was terrified of using a torch, and I wasn't going to send out a corporal or one of my sergeants to actually guide the plane in, you know, or the chopper in. Because I thought, if anyone's going to do it, it's going to be me, because I've already lost one corporal. I'm not going to lose another one, so I'll do it. But I wasn't going to use a torch, because with a torch, guiding him in with a torch, you've got a beam that goes up, and it was that sort of humid sort of an evening. So that beam basically comes back on the origination point, and I would have been a target. So I said, no, I'll be clever here, I'll use a Zippo lighter. So I always had a Zippo lighter, which is the old cigarette lighter. And then Bob Carney had one. I said, give me your Zippo. And he said, what do you want a Zippo for? I said, give me a bloody Zippo. So I just got the Zippo. And I just got out there as a plane was coming in. I just lit the 2 Zippos. And then by that stage, Blue Mulvey was on the radio talking the chopper in. So I'm up there with a Zippo, thinking, oh, I'm safe here, you know. Next minute, he throws the spotlight right on me. And as Bob Carney said in his book, he said, I shat myself, he said in the book, because I'm totally exposed, you know. So anyway, and it's probably one of the most frightening periods I've ever had in my life, because any minute I expected a bullet in the back of the head. I really did. I thought, this is it, I'm gone here. And, you know, when you're up there like this, you ever been in a situation where you try to shrink? You know, you sort of try to get, but you can't. You just got to stay there. So anyway, once they'd spotted me and once they'd seen how far they were off the ground, thank God they took the spotlight off and came down. And we quickly got him on and he took off. Well, that was the good news, but the bad news was that all that activity had alerted the NVA as to where we were. So we had to get out of there real quick because I was frightened of mortars coming in on that position as well. So we had to withdraw to another position, which we did, which was a bamboo clump again. I love that bamboo. And we got into that bamboo, and then I called in more artillery fire and also Puff the Magic Dragon because they were then putting an attack in on the village south of us. So it might have only been 10 or 30 that had a go at us, but there was a much larger number following up after that. And I thought we could break them up, but we didn't. They were determined to hit that small village, which is south of us. But the next day, I mean, we then stayed there that night, and the next day they sent out a whole squadron of APCs, which is about 15 APCs, because we still weren't sure as to whether it was totally clear. So I married up with the APCs and put my guys on board, and then we quietly went down to where we had our first contact, and you could see the area where we had our contact. You could see all of these mortar shell craters where they'd put the mortars in. And then we went a little bit further on and we found some body parts and some sandals and packs and all that sort of stuff and blood bandages and everything else. So didn't find any bodies because they really do, as a matter of principle, take their bodies with them because they were worried that we'd mutilate them. And then the Buddhists believe you go to heaven without an ear or without a finger. You go to heaven without an ear or a finger. So they're really quite conscious of that. And also they have to be buried a particular way as well. So they used to be paranoid. You know, not that we had done any of that, but that's propaganda, I guess. So they do everything to get their bodies out. So all occasionally we'd find would just be little body parts and bags and bandages and blood trails and stuff like that. So, yeah, and that was a three-hour type contact from start to finish, roughly. Next day, the CO got me to, he flew me down to, he rang me, didn't ring me, but he got me on the radio and said, look, I've got good news and bad news. He said, the good news is Blue's all right, the bad news is lost his leg. And I thought, oh, God. This young kid came from Tasmania, he was a champion hockey player. And I just really felt bad, you know. Anyway, he said, look, do you want to go down and see him? I said, absolutely. So he got me a chopper and I went down to see him at the 36 Sadak Hospital. And at the time, the Americans were just having a huge operation called Junction City, and they were getting hit left, right and centre. And I had to actually walk down a post-op ward because Blue had the last bed on the right. And I had to walk through this post-op ward to get to Blue, and I've never seen so many terrible sights in my life. You know, guys with no arms and legs, guys with their stomach out on the table next to them, you know, I mean, just terrible. These guys had just been shot up so bad. And here's Blue, he's on the morphine. They'd sort of give him a really good boost. He was as happy as Larry, you know, because he was drugged, you know. But anyway, I said g'day and how you going, how you feeling, and you don't make reference of his leg gone because he's so doped up, you know, you just talk to him. Anyway, I had to walk back out that post-op ward, and a good friend of mine who was a doctor at 36 Evac, Australian, he also ended up being my best man. I said, John, I've got to go and get pissed. I've got to get a drink. I said, this is just terrible. He said, look, I know. He said, that's the worst I've seen too, and I'm a doctor. So he and I just went out in the grog all night. I didn't go back. We sent the chopper back, and my CO understood. He understood. And so John Taskey and I, who's now a top anaesthetist in Brisbane, he and I got stuck into the grog, and it was just depression on my part. I just had to do something because I felt bad about Blue, but when I saw these casualties, 50 badly wounded soldiers on either side of the post-op ward, and some of them were just horrific injuries. I just felt terrible. So yeah, that was our little excursion in the Long Highs. No, that wasn't the Long Highs. That was the Horseshoe type ambush. The Long Highs was another one where our B company was doing a patrol down from us, and at that time I was attached to D company, and they got me and our guys to go up on the high ground to support the high ground, and just to clear it in case there were any bad guys there. And that's when B company hit the minefield, and we lost so many people in that. Just terrible. And we could see it all from up on the top of the mountain looking down. I didn't have binoculars, you don't need those in Vietnam. But you could just see the plume of black smoke and, a track that's blown 30 feet in the air. This is a 30-tonne vehicle that's just blown to pieces. And I think in that we lost, I know there was, I think from memory, 12 killed and about 24 wounded, or something like that. And it was just probably the worst incident of the battalion's tour in Vietnam. So we were all up there, and we were fairly depressed about all of that. Obviously relieved that we weren't involved, but depressed for our mates because we knew a lot of those guys. And one of my close mates was killed, Jack Carruthers, and one of my instructors from Portsea, Bruce McQualter, who I couldn't stand as an instructor at Portsea. He and I just were on different wavelengths. But I had a chance of serving with him in the battalion, and in particular in his company, B company. What a fantastic company commander. Really first-class company commander. I think he just liked giving officer cadets a hard time, And of course he was killed, which was just sad, and a lot of other guys, and a lot of guys were very, very badly wounded. And that night we just harboured up on top of this Nui Long Highs, and across from us at night there was this damn fire going, little fire, and obviously it was a Viet Cong cooking. And I thought, right, we're going to get you blokes. So I called in mortars. Couldn't call in artillery because the angle was not opportune. It had to be something that goes up and comes down. So we got onto our mortar platoon, and because they were delighted to have a bit of a crack, and we'd fire some mortars and the fire would go out. So I got him. And we'd all quietly sit there. Next minute the fire would come back on again. Next minute I call in some more mortars. Fire would go out. And in the end, the fire kept coming on, and I said, well, look, if that guy is that hungry, let him have his feed. We just forgot about him. So it was a bit of humour in it towards the end of it, but that whole operation was probably the low point in. And we lost a lot of guys with mines. Our battalion lost a lot of guys with mines, and it demoralises you. If you can see the enemy and close with the enemy and kill them, or he kills you, that's one thing. But you can't fight against a mine. It's something that's in the ground. And they were jumping jacks, M16s. They jump out and they just chop you in half at waist length, waist height. So that was probably one of our worst episodes, I would think.
Well, where do I start? Firstly, that when you're in the long high hills and you're seeing your men walk into these mines, that's an interesting, the anger that spurred.
Absolutely, and anger and helplessness. Anger and helplessness. The anger is to like absolute cowardice. But we weren't fighting normal people. We're fighting guerrillas. and a lot of the same is being seen today in modern warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it was anger, but it was also wanting to square up, wanting to sort of find a few, and that's when the chap across the gully from us cooking his meal, I thought, right, there might be 3 or 4 of them there, we'll see if we can get them. But we tried, and we couldn't shoot them because we give our position away, so we didn't want them to know that we were up there. So I tried to use mortars, and he kept lighting his fire and kept cooking. But what we could see, and what disturbed us all, was the fact that we knew a lot of those guys. We really knew a lot of those guys, and we just knew some of those were the guys that were hurt. We didn't know at the time. I mean, they came up on the radio and said that Sunray and Sunray Minor had been, evacuated. So I knew the company commander had been one of the guys, and I knew Jack Carruthers was the other guy. I mean, Jack Carruthers is a mate of mine. He and I used to go to an American officers club, obviously drinking and having a good time. And I used to bet the Americans that my man, Jack, could drink a bottle of champagne standing on his head. And the Americans would say, "God damn, nobody can do that." Jack would open a bottle of champagne, he'd stand on his hands, and he would scull a bottle of champagne standing on his head. And I would just take the money. I mean, that's the sort of bloke he was. He was just a wonderful character, and I mean, it was it's a very small sliver of shrapnel that went into his head here, and it must have done, obviously irreparable damage. He was in a coma and then died in a coma, never recovered. So, very sad time.
Well, you said when you lost one war that the wall went up. Here you'd lost so many mates.
Yeah, absolutely.
What happened then? What was your personal reaction to that?
You anger, and questions as to why, and you even start to question your Christianity or your Catholicism. If there is a God, why does he allow this to happen? And I don't think it's an unfair question to ask that. And you start to question also in terms of, what are we doing here? I mean, no sooner you have a contact and you think you've eliminated 10 of them, next minute there's another 10. So even in those days, you're starting to have some serious doubts about how the war was going. The thing is that we knew that we were winning the battles, but also we felt we were losing the war because of the political turmoil that was being created back home here by Dr. Cairns and Judy Morosi and the moratorium marches and all that sort of business. And those newspaper clippings were sent to my diggers. We knew what was going on. So you start to get a little bit demoralised as to, why are we doing this and why are these people so angry, and they can't all be university students and rent a crowd. There's got to be some real resentment there. And that sort of sticks in your mind a bit. You think, what is going on? And especially when you start to lose a lot of friends, you start to question and it makes you angry, makes you very, very angry. But I could still cut myself off. I could just cut myself off completely, whereas it almost didn't happen, which is sad, but that's the way you've got to be, because you can't break down. You just can't break down.
Well, how did you keep the morale high, or how did you lift morale in the platoon?
Through humour, principally. Fun, humour, pranks. I mean, we're coming back from Vung Tau once, one of our excursions into Vung Tau, and we did a mock ambush of a little Vietnamese village where I pinched a pig, a little baby pig. But I didn't pinch it, I actually paid the guy 100 dong or 200 dong. I've got to say, he didn't want to sell it, but I didn't steal it. I gave him some money for it. And we put it in the little Jeep that we had, and we got into base, and nobody knew that we had this pig. Nobody knew we had this pig. So what I did, we painted it, sort of a tiger, because our mascot was a tiger, so we painted it like a tiger. And it used to sleep in my fighting pit, so if I was ever mortared, I'd have to get down there with all of that pig crap, etc., and scraps that we used to feed him and everything else. But interestingly enough, we had a company sergeant major who was not well liked by the soldiers. I won't mention his name, but his nickname was Pig. His nickname was Pig. And what we used to do is, this pig became like a dog, you know, it really used to follow me around like a little dog. And I'd get Bob Carney or one of the soldiers to hold the pig down the bottom of the road in front of our tents. And I'd get at the top of my voice, I'd yell out, "Here, pig, 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 here, pig, 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 pig." And this particular CSM would stick his head out of the tent like this, as somebody's having a go at him. And next minute, this pig is running up the road, and the diggers are just rolling around, laughing, just absolutely. You know, but there's nothing he could do. A, I'm an officer, and B, I mean, that's my pig, you know. So it was things like that. We had a boxing tent in the back of my tent, where we'd box, but we'd never box in the head. We'd just box in the stomach. So in other words, I'd blow the whistle and guys put gloves on and they just fight like hell, hitting each other in the solar plexus and the stomach region. Not done in spite or anything else, but it got a lot of frustrations and also a few giggles as well. We'd listen to a lot of music. I mean, I was a Supremes nut. Johnny Rivers, the Supremes. Who's the other guy that can't recall his name? But it's definitely Supremes. They were in those days. So in my tent, you know, I just have the Supremes blaring, and you're not supposed to drink in the lines. And I always had booze in my tent. You know, Bacardi and rum. Bacardi and Coke. We used to drink all the time, and we'd have fun. You know, we'd have fun. We'd have a giggle, and the diggers would get up into a bit of trouble. Like one particular time was Thanksgiving in November. And somebody from my platoon stole a huge Thanksgiving ham from the soldiers' mess. And of course, we all ate it. We didn't know where it came from. Well, we knew where it came from, but I didn't ask any questions. And the next day, this pig, CSM, the company sergeant major, was doing an inspection of all the garbage cans in front of my platoon's tents. And he found the evidence. He found the ham bone in one of the garbage cans. Of course, it was Bob Carney's tent. So Bob, as a corporal, was charged with stealing soldiers' rations. And he was marched up to the CO because only the commanding officer can hear the charge of a corporal. And I went up as a character witness. And of course, here am I, the platoon commander, going up as a character witness, and I'd also been aiding and abetting. In other words, I'd been receiving stolen goods. Because I didn't know. I mean, by this stage, I've had a few drinks and I thought, this ham really tastes good. So the CO, because he knew, I mean, the adjutant said to me, "What about Bob?" And I said, "Mate, he's a terrific digger, he's fantastic. And I think he's being framed because Pig didn't like him." So he said, "Look, we've got to go through the motions and charge him and all that." And he said, "I want you to come up as a witness, not as a witness, as a character reference." So here's the CO and the RSM, the Regimental Sergeant Major, and Corporal Carney without his hat and belt because he might use them as a missile, standing to attention in front of the CO. And the CO said to me, he said, "Mick, what do you think about Corporal Carney? What's Corporal Carney like as a corporal?" And I said, "Sir, he is one of my best patrol commanders, loved by the soldiers and invaluable to our platoon. But unfortunately, when he consumes alcohol, he's a social misfit." And oh, God. So they all cracked up, March out, Corporal Carney. So Corporal Carney marched out. And then Bob and I were walking back down towards our lines, He said, "Hey, Skip," he said, "what do you mean social misfit?" And I said, "Bob, you know exactly what I mean." And he laughed. He just laughed. But he got nothing. He didn't get a reprimand or anything else. So it was always, I guess, a sense of humour, trying to keep a sense of humour going. And we had a lot of black humour at that time in our platoon. We would see the funny things in some fairly serious things, but we would see the funny side of it. Not at the expense of others in terms of those close to us, but, if we saw some Vietnamese friendlies doing something silly, we'd all just, laugh and carry on. And yeah, look, I think, again, it wasn't just myself that managed to maintain morale. It was my leadership group. It was my corporals and sergeants that helped to maintain that. And they were all they all had my sort of humour, and I think that's interesting. It wasn't part of the selection process, but it's the way it worked out, where we had similar senses of humour, and we just laugh at the most crazy things, and I think that in itself kept us going.
I think that black humour is an interesting
aspect
to it all.
Oh, yes. I mean, look, some of the things that Bob Carney did, little thing like, you know, the drop latrine? Yeah. The drop latrine. We had a blowfly. Blowfly is the battalion hygiene corporal. We call him the battalion blowfly. And he's a guy that goes out and cleans, you know, the loos and all that sort of stuff, and I'll never forget this. He was determined to get back at us, you know, because we used to give him a hard time. And I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody. But what he had done, he had actually put down petrol in the bottom of these drop latrines. And one of the guys had been giving him a hard time, went over to sit on the loo and relieve himself, and he was a smoker. And he lit a cigarette and dropped the match down, and of course it exploded, didn't it? And all the lids went up, and stuff blew up, and he had some very serious burns around the private parts. And again, you see, we just cracked up. I mean, he wasn't serious. He wasn't sort of third-degree burns or anything like that, you know. But he was in a reasonable amount of discomfort. And we just laughed. I mean, that's the sort of humour, and that's the sort of thing that kept us going. It's black humour. It's odd, you know. Some people would say, "Oh my God, that's terrible," but we would just crack up.
Can I just take you a step back to the minefields? Your platoon was quite fortunate that you never
didn't have to work in it, or didn't have to walk in it, or no. We were mostly out from it. And I'm very thankful for that, because in particular C Company, I mean, they lost 3 officers, four officers, and a lot of soldiers because of the Viet Cong or NVA lifting them and replanting them.
But VC or NVA mines, how did you avoid them?
Well, you didn't know, because the way to find them is to step on them, and then it's too late. So you just never knew where there was a mine or a booby trap. You just did what you had to do. I mean, we were taught certain tricks to find booby traps and tripwires and stuff like that. But, you know, when you're out there for a fair while, after a while, again, you get a bit confident and a bit blasé, and perhaps sometimes you're not doing things the way you should be doing. But I think for the grace of God, you know, we were very, very lucky that we didn't hit any mines or booby traps.
So the minefield that B Company walked into, was that a VC minefield?
Yes, it was what they had done, very cleverly unfortunately. They had managed to find in that area a 800-pound bomb, which was a bomb which had been dropped out of an aircraft, and it was a dud. It didn't go off. But they managed to wire it in such a way that it would go off on command. And then they planted M16 mines out to the side. So as the track approached, it detonated the 800-pound, and that track just went over here and just fell down, and some of the guys were caught underneath it. And then the immediate drill is to do a counter-ambush drill. So immediately the second track dismounted with a platoon commander, Jack Carruthers, and rushed through thinking there was an enemy ambush, and of course they rushed straight into a minefield. So that's what really happened. They were very clever the way they organised that, very clever, and that was more, I think, NVA rather than VC.
So Mick, you've told us quite a lot of stuff about your operations with the Recon Platoon, and you've just gone through and described Horseshoe, but in your mind, what was your worst time, do you think, in Vietnam?
Oh, definitely the Nui Dat, I think. At least the contact down in Long Green, as we call it, where Bluey Twaits got hit, at least I felt that I was in control. I felt there was some control in terms of what was happening. irrespective of the size of the enemy or what they were doing. In the Nui Dat, I just felt totally helpless. I mean, totally helpless because A, I couldn't see the enemy. B, if you can't see them, you can't shoot them. I didn't know where Normie Wommel was initially. Then being forced back by enemy fire and the risk of leaving him and saying, well, we're not going to leave him, we're going to get him out. So that was probably my worst in terms of operationally, in terms of helplessness, you know, and everything is going through your mind, everything that you've learnt, everything that you've experienced anecdotally or professionally, you just feel, what do I do now? What do I need to do now to get out of this situation? And that was probably the worst period for me, I think. And also guilt, I think, you know, guilt and losing Norm, thinking that maybe I could have done it another way, but I've sort of examined myself in that, and I just don't think we could have done it another way. That's the problem. But, you know, you've got this sort of guilt, losing a good soldier.
And do you think that guilt is still with you?
Oh, for sure. No question about it. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you never get rid of that. You can't, you know, although I had the ability of just, you know, shutting off in terms of emotions and things of that nature, stuff like that you can't forget ever. You simply can't, you know, because you're always thinking about it. You know, I mean, he was a young man who was married with 4 kids. I mean, is there another way? Was there another way that I could have done this? And I've agonised over it. I've searched, and in all conscience, I don't think there was another way of doing it. But perhaps we could have done it a bit slower, with less bravado, and maybe with less speed. You know, more fire and movement rather than a frontal assault. But you know, you don't know. You really don't know, and I think that's something that lives with you forever.
And as you've said a couple of times today, particularly when you then went on to the recon platoon, you felt like you began to think like your enemy.
Yes.
And in a sense, you became a guerrilla commander.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
what was it about, or what was the key to being a guerrilla commander?
I think you've got to put yourself into their mind and into their shoes. You've got to think the way they do, and you've got to be nasty, and you've got to basically become a guerrilla in terms of the thinking. Otherwise, you're trying to fight them on your terms, and yet they're not fighting on your terms. But if you're able to put yourself into their mind as to what would they do next, what would they do here, what would they do there, and if you're able to basically, if you like, almost adopt a guerrilla mentality, I think you're able to combat them a hell of a lot better. Because if you're doing it just conventionally, I think you'll lose, quite frankly.
So what was the unconventional guerrilla
Well, principally the way that we used to lay up in our harbours, the way that we used to move constantly. You know, we'd never sort of stay in one place for too long. The same as them. I mean, they didn't stay around for too long. We never used tracks. Quite often we'd go without water for long periods of time, which they do as well, so that they're not caught on the creek. You know, in other words, you're very careful with conserving your water, because it's on the creek bed where you get hit. You know, I mean, that's where they get hit and that's where we get hit, because we have to come down for water, they have to come down for water. So you'd constantly be looking at ways and means of trying to outthink them, I think, more than anything. But to do that, you've got to think like a guerrilla, and you've got to be a bit sort of nasty.
But you're not local to the country.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like that you, by the end of your time, that you really understood
absolutely.
The terrain that you were working in?
No question about it. Knew the terrain, didn't necessarily know it intimately, but I knew the conditions that we had to operate in. I knew what they did, I knew the way that they moved. I had a good feel of village life in terms of how villages operate. I also had a good feeling as to what I thought were relatively safe areas to move in at a greater speed. And that all comes through experience in country. I mean, it's just something, it's a steep learning curve, but it's something that you pick up towards the end of your tour. And I I mean, I put in for a bit of an extension originally because I wanted to stay, you know, because I felt I was just starting to get really good at what I was doing, and I felt it'd be a waste to lose that. But my CEO at the time said, "No, I don't think it's a good idea, Mike. I think you better get on the boat." So I went on the boat.
Well, we'll come and talk about that in a moment. Just one question about how often did you get into villages?
Quite often, because we used to gather a lot of information from villages. For some of our patrols, I had a Vietnamese interpreter with me, so it was very handy, where we'd gather information and then assess the situation, analyse, and then either report back to higher headquarters or act on the information ourselves. So we got very close. We got very close to villages. Unfortunately, in one particular village, the VC came in one night and they took the village chief's daughter, who was about 14 and pregnant, and disemboweled her and hung her up in one of the huts. And we were there the next day, and I sensed that this village chief was, if you will, not in a good mood, not with us anyway. And through the interpreter kept saying, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" And he pointed inside to his hut, and that's where his daughter was hanging upside down, and she'd been disemboweled, and the fetus was hanging over her head, you know. And again, you get this rage, you get this anger. You think, well, you know, if you guys want to fight, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get you. So, you know, you see these sort of things, and you really feel for the village chief because it's his daughter, and also the fact is that he'd been feeding you information. So you're guilty. You feel guilty about it all because you're the guy that's been getting the information from him, and the VC must have found out about it and came in and decided to make an example, and they did that very effectively.
And you saw the body?
Yeah. Yep. Not very pleasant.
No. And how did you keep up that relationship with him?
No, we didn't think it was appropriate. No, we had to move on to another source of intelligence, unfortunately. I mean, look, I just felt terrible. You know, I felt terrible for him and obviously the kid as well, you know. But no, I think he had done enough for us, and I think it was time to move on and get information from someone else. But I had fun. I mean, you know, that was nasty, but I also had fun in the villages as well, because I used to eat all their food. They'd always give me a drink, Wiki Vietnam, which is rice whiskey, or they'd have a warm bottle of Ba Mui Ba, which is a sort of local beer. So I'd always have a bit of a sip with them and eat some roasted pig's ears and nook mam and all that sort of stuff. And I'm a great believer that if you want to get close to people, you must embrace their culture. And that's exactly what I did. And I never got sick or got dysentery or anything like that, which is really quite amazing.
And how did that help? I mean, apart from winning the support of the locals and relying on them for intelligence, how else did it help you?
Look, I think it certainly got us closer to the villagers in terms of hearts and minds, because quite often we'd bring things in for them. You know, things that we knew that they didn't have in large supply, we always bring something in for them. We always used to pay for everything. We'd insist on paying, so, you know, if they gave us some whiskey or gave us some beer and we sat around a table and had a bit of a chat, we'd always leave some money for them. And I think in terms of hearts and minds, it helped enormously. And I learnt that really from, there was a guy called Barry Peterson, who was an ex-major, Australian Army, who served with the Montagnards up in the hills of Vietnam. And Barry's also an MC winner, and they call him the Tiger Man. And you should interview him actually. But Barry's that was his mantra. I mean, he really embraced the culture and even dressed like them. And I was at Canungra when he was there, and I used to hear these stories, and I thought to myself, well, if I'm going to get close to these people, I've got to embrace their culture. So I did. So I did that quite often, and my soldiers did as well. I mean, that photograph with the young girl, I mean, we were cooking crabs that we got from a local market, you know, and cook it, we ate with chopsticks and all that sort of business. I mean, I think if you want to get close to people, I think you must respect and embrace their culture.
And then that helped you when you were out on
Oh,
on
yeah,
patrol?
it helped us get information. I think there was a degree of trust, basically. It helped us get some more info to work off.
Well, you've just mentioned that you did ask for an extension. So how did you feel when you knew your time was up?
Well, I just felt that, I spoke to the CO over a beer, I got to say. It wasn't a formal request. And I just said to him, I said, look, I just feel that I'm in my prime at the moment. I mean, everything that I've learnt the last, because I was there for nearly 14 months because of the advance party. I just felt that I was right at my peak, and perhaps I could do some service for the next battalion that relieved us, which was 7th Battalion. And my CO was very astute, and he could see that I was, just by my face, that I was strained anyway. And he said, no, I think you better go home. You know, you've done your job, go home. And the other thing, of course, that I didn't realise that I'd been recommended for a Military Cross. So obviously he knew that, because he was the guy that recommended me. And I just felt that he didn't want me to be further exposed at that point in time.
And how did you travel back home?
On the Sydney, yeah, and that was fun. A lot of booze, a lot of fun, and a lot of sport, volleyball and all that sort of stuff, and winding down. And then we arrived in Sydney and marched through the city of Sydney, and apparently the reception was far different to the time that they left because of the politics.
Well, what sort of difficulties did you experience because of the change in the mood of the public opinion?
First hand, I went to the Bankstown RSL club once, and there was some ceremony, and I was in my uniform actually, and I was wearing my medals. And at this stage, all I had was just the Vietnam Service Medal and the Freedom Fighters Medal. And some guys came up to me in the RSL club and said, "What's that?" And I said, "Well, Vietnam Service Medals. That's not a war, that's a police action, you know." I walked out of the club and I never went back into it. In fact, I've hardly ever gone back into an RSL club because of that. Now, I know it's changing. A lot of the guys who are now heading up the RSL are Vietnam veterans, but I still hold a grudge. Because they did not treat us right when we came back, nor did the government of the day, actually. The 1988 march through Sydney was too little too late, because meanwhile a lot of these guys were stuffed in the head.
Well, just touching for a moment on a few highlights of the rest of your army career. You then went on to join SAS.
Mm-hmm.
And how satisfying was that for you? That had been one of your goals.
Yes, very satisfying. From the time I joined the army, I wanted to be an SAS trooper or soldier or officer. And for me, it was just extremely rewarding. It was a penultimate for me. And also I managed to do a lot of courses, and I was also cadre commander for a year. In other words, I was doing the training of the recruits coming into the unit and the selection of those individuals, and I found that very rewarding, because I could basically do exactly what I did with Recce Platoon. Same thing, where I ran a course with some NCOs, and then we'd have 30 that would attend, and we'd only pick 2 or 3 to go into SAS. That's how strict we used to be with our selection in those days. And you get back to doing your parachuting and your diving, and my speciality was water. I was very good in the water. So you do all that sort of stuff, and you're a bit of an action man, and it was fun. It was fun. I was playing rugby over there as well, which was good, and I met my then wife over there as well, and got married in Perth. So it was a full-on time for me, basically. But then I went to Commandos in Melbourne.
So those SAS recruits that you were training, would they then go on to tours in Vietnam?
Yep, absolutely. And my criteria used to be, would I go to war with this chap? And if I wouldn't select them. Simple as that. So, I'd put them through the whole course, And I'd talk to my NCOs, who were very experienced soldiers, and I'd say, well, would you go on patrol with this individual? And then the guy would say, no, I wouldn't go on patrol with him. I wouldn't go on patrol with him. I'd say, well, he fails, so he fails. And that was the key, to get into the regiment. Would you take this fellow in your patrol? And if you were not prepared to take him in your patrol, he wouldn't pass, for all sorts of reasons. So the selection criteria is very tough.
And what were some of the range of reasons that you wouldn't go on patrol with someone?
It just could be the bumble-footed. Some people got two left feet and too noisy, unable to navigate, not fit, not prepared to put in the hard yards. I mean, our course is very strict. It's a very hard course. We had a long-range patrol course, which is 72 hours without sleeping. With a pack on your back, you try doing that. I mean, it's very, very demanding physically and mentally, and some guys just tossed it in, couldn't handle it. So there was all the physical side, but there was a mental side as well, and you'd balance the physical with the mental, because you just don't want a whole bunch of Arnold Schwarzeneggers. You want a balance. But at the end of the day, you just say, is this a person that you would go on patrol with? And if you said no, he would not pass. It's as simple as that. Why should you inflict somebody on somebody else that you're not prepared to go to war with? It's unfair.
And after that period, then you went on to Commandos?
Yep. Commandos in Fort Gellibrand, which is in Melbourne, which was a CMF unit, but I was doing other things there as well, special operations, which I'd rather not talk about. It was a highly classified position in terms of security, same as SAS, but principally my position was adjutant oblique quartermaster. So I was the adjutant of the unit, in charge of the administration, quartermaster in charge of the logistics, but also I was doing other work as well in terms of the special operations field.
And the reason you don't want to talk about those ops is that it was classified?
Yeah, classified, yes, my word. Yeah.
And then I understand you went back to 5 Battalion for a short period.
Yep, went back to 5 as the adjutant, and it was funny to go back as the adj actually. And I had a good time, but again, you get this professional officer and career officer bit, and I felt, and of course by this stage I was communicating with my father on a fairly regular basis, and I didn't have confidence anymore in terms of what I was doing. I was never a parade ground soldier, although I can look smart on parade. I mean, it's not my reason for being. My reason for being was to be a soldier, and principally active service, more in the active role rather than just an administrative role. And I just felt it was time to make a move, so I resigned my commission at that time.
And you have told us earlier in the day what you went on to do. So I'm just wondering, when you finally resigned and left the army, did you miss it?
Yes, I did, my word. Oh, it was a huge wrench for me. I mean, I got out simply because of some of the individuals in the army, but I also got out because of family. I had some responsibilities that I had to fulfil, and I found it a huge wrench. In fact, even today, Peter Cosgrove, who's now the Chief of Defence, I mean, he's an old friend of mine. I look at Peter, I admire him in terms of what he's achieved now. I mean, I would never dream to be anywhere at that level, but it's interesting to sort of think back and think, well, where would I have ended up? Would I have been an old passed over major, or would I have ended up being a colonel or a brigadier? You really don't know. I wasn't prepared to take the risk. I really wasn't prepared to take the risk, and I decided that I'd achieved everything in the army as a young person, at 32 years of age, that I wanted to achieve, and it was time to move on. And I'm glad I did when I did, to be perfectly frank, because I've counselled a lot of fellows who've got out much later, and they've struggled much more than me. I struggled for 2 years, to cope with it all. But I was very lucky because I then went overseas, and I was overseas for a long time. So you're away from it all. You're divorced from it. Whereas a lot of the guys get out and they're still living in the same area, and I think a lot of the older guys really struggle. And they also struggle to readjust in terms of their professional life and jobs and family and all that sort of business. So I think I got out at the right time, to be honest, for all sorts of reasons.
Well, you, as you say, you were on full-on active service and saw a lot of high-level action and in highly dangerous situations. Did you suffer any nightmares after?
Oh, absolutely. Flashbacks, my word. Yeah, PTSD. I didn't realise I had PTSD for years. I had no idea. Because I'm an officer, we're not supposed to get these things. We're supposed to be strong. And I've had soldiers ringing me. I mean, I'm Dorothy Dix, really. I've had soldiers ringing me for years with problems. And I've tried to explain to them. And I'll never forget this. It was about 1990 or 89. We had a staff college come through from Queenscliff, which is the Major's seeking promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. And at that time I was a director of the Hardy Wine Company, and we had them through as wine tasting and a bit of a giggle. Well, lo and behold, in the group, the instructors coming through as brigadiers and colonels, there was about 4 or 5 guys that I knew from my time when I was an officer. Well, we got stuck into the grog, seriously got stuck into it, just to touch base again. I hadn't seen these guys for years. And anyway, I got home and I just sat in a chair and I started to cry. And my wife at the time, she had no idea what was going on. And I just kept saying and repeating, nobody understands. Nobody understands. I kept repeating myself. And she was really worried, and she rang Bob Carney, who was one of my patrol commanders, and Bob hasn't had a drink for 30 years, and he came over and he just put his arm around me and said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Nobody understands. Nobody understands." And then a very good neighbour down the road, who was a civilian, not an army man, he came up, and what I hadn't realised, I was having a breakdown. Basically, it was a pent-up stress levels, I guess, from 30 years ago, where I was having a breakdown. So anyway, I got over that, I stopped crying. I wasn't crying boo-hoo, I was just tears just pouring out of my eyes, and I just kept saying, nobody effing understands. I was really getting quite angry. And the next day, Bob rang me and he said, "Look, I think you better go and see Tony Smith." And Tony Smith was a platoon commander in one battalion, he's a psychologist. And I said, I'll have to go and see him because I've never experienced this in my life. So anyway, what I discovered was that subconsciously what I'd said to myself is nobody understands and I've got no one to talk to. Everybody else had me to talk to. I had nobody to talk to because my civilian friends, I couldn't talk to them about Vietnam. Even my wife and kids, I couldn't talk to them about Vietnam. I didn't want to disturb them. And also they wouldn't understand. And that's why I kept saying, nobody understands, nobody understands. So I went and had treatment, and they got into my head, and then I suddenly realised, and I read some books on PTSD, and I realised really that I'd had this all along, but had just chosen to ignore it. And there were certain symptoms there that I'd chosen to ignore for some reason. So that whole, if you like, that whole PTSD stress level was terrible, but I didn't realise I had it. Now that I realise I've got it, I can manage it much better. But I do have flashbacks, and I do have trouble sleeping, and I do have dreams, and yeah, it's not pleasant.
Well, without trying to cause a trigger, I'm just wondering if I can ask you what the core of those dreams are about.
Principally contact situations and quite often helplessness. Again, I don't know whether it gets back to the Nui Dat and Normie Wommel. Quite often, I turn that down. Quite often when you're having a dream and you're falling off a cliff or something, you never seem to hit the bottom, or you're chasing someone, you can't catch them, or someone's chasing after you and they can't catch you, and it goes on and on and on and on. So there are sort of, they're invariably dreams about a contact situation where things are really bad and I can't do anything about it. And that's when I wake up in a cold sweat. And my whole bed has just been absolutely wet with sweat when I've had a bad case of stress.
So how are you these days? Has that talking about it helped?
Oh, it's helped. I mean, I've got a gold card. You know, I've got a 100% pension. I'm not a TPI though. I've got a 100% pension, and I get a service pension, and I think it has helped enormously. I had a very, very good psychiatrist who helped me enormously, I got to say. And because I don't open up. I never used to open up to people. Even what I'm saying to you now, I would never say to anybody in the past. But now I don't care, because it's me, and also it's a condition that I think you have to talk about. You can't just ignore it. So in opening up to this particular psychiatrist, I mean, he just basically got into my head and told me, you know, the problems that I had and why I had it, and it had a lot to do with me suppressing these feelings for such a long period of time. Because you're an officer, you've got to be strong, you can't be weak. Now, hang on, you know, we're all the same. Whether we're carrying something on our shoulder or not, we've all got the same emotions, the same moods, the same condition. Why shouldn't I get stressed like some of my soldiers? And I'd say there's something like a good 60-70% of my soldiers are TPIs. You know, they're buggered, and that's sad. But you know, and they've had someone to talk to all along, which is me, which I really appreciate. Because I find it's therapy as well when they talk to me, it helps me. But after a period of time, and me in terms of talking to someone else about the issue, I couldn't talk to anybody else, and I think that's when I was totally suppressed. So when I got drunk with these old army buddies of mine, I think it just loosened me up, and that's when I just kept saying, nobody understands, nobody understands.
And is there anything today that you've talked about that you haven't talked with anybody else about, or have you?
Oh no, most of the things we've discussed today, I've spoken to other people, not publicly but quietly. You know, I don't talk about Vietnam a lot to people generally because they don't understand. You see, that's the issue. They don't understand, and I think that was the frustration that was in me at the time, where I felt that I had to tell my story. I felt I had to tell someone. And I think that's where Bob Carney has done just an outstanding job by writing Crossfire, because it's put a few things in perspective in terms of us and personalities and what we did. And it got it into the public arena where I don't have to talk about it, if you know what I mean. It's all there for people to read, and it's all factual. So it helped, that book helped me enormously in terms of, if you like, getting me to relax a bit more. Because, as I say, nobody understands. That's the problem. Very hard to get people to understand and realise what some of our guys went through.
Well, I hope this will go some way to helping people understand.
Oh, I sincerely hope so. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think that perhaps someone will get some benefit out of it. You know, you, me, Louise, or whatever, people who see it in the future. I mean, I think it's important. You see, because we've never experienced these sort of situations in the past. I mean, there's been wars and people have had shell shock and all that sort of business, but every warrior that's come home has been treated like a hero. We came home, we were shunned, and I think that's the tragedy of the Vietnam War, where they were badly treated. And I think the government of the day has a lot to answer for.
And do you think that some of that has been now redeemed?
Oh, I think the Welcome Home Parade was good, 1988. I think what's amazing now, and I march now every Anzac Day, is to watch the young people who are there. I have workmates that actually get out, you know, and there I march with my old SAS guys, and you know, you're wearing your medals and all that sort of stuff, and smartly dressed, and you're marching in step, and you know, And here's all the guys, g'day Mick, g'day Mike, how are you? You know, now that would have never happened. But now all of a sudden, you know, my grandson comes out and watches with my daughter, and I think that is a bit of the pain going. I mean, it's a bit of, hey, okay, it was worthwhile and people do care. And maybe now people do understand, whereas in the past they haven't. Or people now are trying to understand, whereas in the past they haven't.
And when you stop and spend time like today, you have done today, and look back on your time in Vietnam, how do you think it changed you?
Oh, it made me a far better person, no question about it. By that I mean I'm tougher for it, but it's also made me realise that no matter how bad things get here, you know, the old saying, you know, don't give me a hard time, because I've been to hell and back. And even today in life or in business or circumstance, you know, something's not going quite right, and you know, a lot of people throw their hands in the air and it's just too hard. I just think, hang on, I've been through worse than this. This is easy. This is not a problem. I can handle this. So I think it's made me much tougher. I think also what it's done, it's made me realise how good we've got it in Australia, in terms of the, if you like, the poverty and the lack of medicine and the lack of proper conditions right throughout Southeast Asia, but in particular in Vietnam. And I think what we've got is worth fighting for, basically. I think we've just got a wonderful society, and I think we've got to protect it.
And this might be a difficult question to answer, but if you were to think about your proudest moment or memory,
Mm-hmm.
or even your strongest memory from Vietnam, what do you think that might be?
Oh, look, I think getting Bluey Twaits out and not losing another corporal. Because I already lost one, you know.
Well, as we come to the end of our session today, people are going to look back on this interview. What sort of message would you like to put down for future generations?
Oh, look, I think enjoy life. Do what you think is right, and protect our way of life.
And in the context of your war experience?
Oh, look, I'd never wish anybody to go to war, to be honest. I'd wish no war at all. Now, you know, I'm still right. I used to be slightly left of centre, but since September 11, I'm just so far right now that it's scary, to be honest. But that doesn't mean I'm a warmonger. I'm just still very hostile and angry in terms of what's happening to the world today, and in particular in terms of Al-Qaeda and terrorism and whatever. But I just wish that we could all live in peace and harmony.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Is there any last words that you'd like to say either about 5 Battalion or the Recon Platoon that you'd like to put down on record?
Yeah, look, I think, I mean, we're all very, if you like, very proud and parochial as to our respective units. But I'd have to say, I mean, the officers and men of 5 Battalion were just outstanding. And the diggers in Recce Platoon were fantastic. My first diggers, which was 2 Platoon, were terrific, and I was sorry to leave them. And of course, anti-tank platoon, in the short period of time that I commanded them, they were just absolutely exemplary in that fairly major contact up on the hill. So I was very lucky where I had exposure to 3 platoons. Unfortunately, the one that I think I achieved most as a platoon commander was Recce Platoon, and they were a terrific bunch of blokes.
So if you were to put on record something about how you would like Recce Platoon to be remembered, what would that be? Trailblazers, pioneers, having a go and doing something different.
which you know, an infantry platoon was not trained to do. They really were groundbreakers at that time. Now, of course, it's a part of the course, but in those days they were really, and we were trained in country. I mean, it's not as if we had 12 months training here before we then did what we did over there. I mean, it was a short crash 2-week course, a 10-day course, and you know, with all that, with that short training and with the input from SAS that we had, for them to perform the way that they did was just outstanding. I mean, really quite outstanding.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with us today. It's been a pleasure.